He brought his secretary to Chicago's most extravagant ball, not to impress, but to make a fool of himself. When she entered the ballroom, the entire hall erupted in mocking laughter. But when she took off her coat, all fell silent. Senators forgot their wives' names, tycoons forgot they were breathing, and Roman Vesper, the man who made Chicago tremble, for the first time in his life felt a chill run down his spine. She wasn't his secretary. She never had been his secretary. If you enjoy stories of power, secrets, and love built on the ashes of betrayal, hit like now and comment the name of the city you're watching so I know how far my story has progressed. Don't go anywhere. The next part will leave you breathless. The rain came in sideways off Lake Michigan, the kind that didn't fall so much as a tack. Horizontal sheets of gray water that turned the black marble steps of the Valkyrie estate into something resembling a river. By 7 o'clock, the armored sedans had already begun arriving in slow, deliberate procession up the private drive, their headlights cutting pale ribbons through the dark. The drivers wore suits, the passengers wore diamonds, and every single one of them, as they stepped beneath the sheltered entrance and surrendered their coats to white-gloved attendants, said some variation of the same thing in some variation of a hushed voice. "Is Vesper coming tonight?" The name moved through the building before the man himself did. It always did. Roman Vesper arrived at 8:14, which was deliberate. He never arrived on time to anything because arriving on time suggested you were eager, and Roman had not been eager for anything in 11 years. His car was black. His suit was black. His expression was the particular blankness of a man who had stopped pretending to feel things he didn't feel somewhere around the age of 26. He was 40 now, which meant he had spent the better part of his adult life perfecting the art of controlled emptiness. He stood in the rain for exactly 3 seconds outside the entrance, long enough that the valets noticed, long enough that the two men flanking him inside the doorway noticed, and then he walked inside without wiping the water from his jacket. Behind him, moving quietly and slightly to his left in the way that people who have learned to make themselves small will do, was Selene Vale. She was carrying his phone, his secondary phone, a leather portfolio, and a single folded umbrella she had not opened because he had not opened his, and she was smart enough to understand that symmetry with Roman Vesper was the safest possible position to occupy. She wore a long wool coat buttoned to the throat. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that was efficient rather than attractive. She wore no jewelry. She wore shoes that were sensible rather than beautiful. She had worked for him for 14 months, and in that time she had learned that the most dangerous thing you could be in his proximity was memorable. So she had worked very hard at not being memorable. The ballroom of the Valkyrie estate was a thing of violent excess. 3 tiers of crystal chandeliers suspended from a ceiling painted in the European fashion, dark oils depicting scenes of conquest and ruin, round tables draped in ivory linen, an orchestra installed in the far corner working through something old and Viennese at a volume calibrated specifically so that guests could speak over it without raising their voices, which allowed conversations to remain private while appearing social. The walls held framed photographs of politicians beside civic landmarks and what appeared to be candid shots of charitable giving, which was the visual language of men who had accumulated so much money that they had begun the long, exhausting project of legitimizing themselves. These were old families. Real old money, 3 and 4 generations deep in manufacturing, real estate, infrastructure, the kind of accumulated wealth that had calcified into something that looked and felt and smelled like respectability. They sat on hospital boards. Their names were on library wings and endowed university chairs. They threw galas for causes they barely understood and wrote checks large enough that the causes didn't ask questions. And they despised Roman Vesper with a specific and practiced contempt that had nothing to do with his crimes and everything to do with his origins. He had grown up in the Bridgeport neighborhood, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaning shop that smelled permanently of solvent and fried onions. His father had been a collection man for a mid-level street organization and had died when Roman was 9 from a knife wound that became infected because his father had not gone to a hospital, because hospitals asked questions. Roman had been raised by an aunt who worked nights and left him largely to himself, which meant he had been raised, effectively, by the street. By the time he was 17, he had done things that could not be undone. By the time he was 22, men 3 times his age were asking his permission before making decisions. He had built his empire from nothing, and from blood, and from a particular kind of cold intelligence that looked like patience but was actually calculation. And now at 40, he controlled the port logistics of 3 major shipping routes, had relationships with 6 aldermen and 2 state senators, and ran the most profitable protection and supply network the city's underworld had seen in 2 decades. The old families needed him. They used him. They hired his men to do things that couldn't be done by anyone whose name appeared on a ballot or a board. And then, having used him, they laughed at him from across the room at events like this one. Roman knew this. He had always known this, which was why he had decided, sometime around noon today, that tonight he was going to humiliate every single one of them first. He moved through the room with the unhurried confidence of a man who understood that rooms rearrange themselves around power, not around politeness. People stepped aside. Not quickly, not obviously, but they moved. A city councilman caught Roman's eye and gave a slight nod that was trying very hard to look like simple recognition and was actually fear dressed in good manners. Roman didn't nod back. He took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and held it without drinking it, and scanned the room with the particular attention of someone cataloging threats. And in the far northeast corner, he found what he was looking for. Alderman Patrick Cruz, 62, gray at the temples, pink in the face, from the champagne he'd been drinking since 6. Beside him was someone Roman didn't recognize, a heavy-set man in a suit that cost real money, but wasn't cut well. Beside that man was a woman young enough to be his daughter, wearing an expression that suggested she was being paid to stand there, which she probably was, in some form or another. And behind Patrick Cruz, speaking to a woman in emerald green, was Vincent Moretti. Roman looked at Vincent Moretti for exactly 2 seconds and then looked away. Selene had materialized at his elbow. "Moretti's been here since 7, she said quietly. "He arrived with Soren Blaine from the Northside Finance Group, and a woman who I don't have on record. The woman doesn't matter. She might." He glanced at her sideways. "Your job tonight is to stay visible." She blinked, just once. Visible. You heard me. She had, in fact, heard him. She had also, over the course of the 40-minute drive from his office downtown, received from Roman what amounted to the most disorienting set of instructions he had ever given her, which was saying something because Roman Vesper's instructions were frequently disorienting. He had told her to check a garment bag that had been placed in the car's trunk. He had told her that what was inside was what she would be wearing tonight. He had told her, when she had started to ask a question, to not ask questions. She had opened the bag in the car's back seat while he stared out the window. The dress inside was midnight silver, floor length, structured at the shoulder, open at the back. It was the kind of garment that required a specific kind of woman to wear it and achieved a specific kind of effect when that woman wore it correctly. And as Selene had held it in her hands in the moving car, she had felt something settle into place in her chest like a lock disengaging. She had not let it show on her face. She had changed in the estate's side entrance cloakroom, which the event organizer had unlocked for her without comment after a brief phone call that Selene had made herself, speaking in the clipped, authoritative voice she had developed over 14 months as the invisible woman who ran the invisible half of Roman Vesper's daily life. Now she stood beside him in the wool coat, the silver dress hidden beneath it, holding his portfolio like a woman who had no other purpose. "When?" she asked. "Give it 20 minutes. She gave it 23. She moved toward the coat check alone, without looking back at him, and handed over her wool coat, and when she turned around and walked back into the ballroom, it was as if the room itself took a breath and forgot to release it. It started at the nearest table. A man looked up from his conversation and stopped speaking mid-sentence. The woman beside him followed his gaze, and her expression did something complicated. At the next table, a senator from the state's south corridor shifted in his chair and watched with the fixed attention of someone who had forgotten where he was. The orchestra continued playing. The chandeliers continued throwing their cold, prismatic light. And through it moved Selene Vale in a midnight silver dress that had been made for exactly this purpose, which was the annihilation of every other thing in the room. She walked toward Roman without hurrying. Somewhere to the right, a woman laughed at something and then caught herself, and the laugh died. Roman watched her cross the floor toward him and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, which was the specific helplessness of a situation moving faster than his ability to control it. He had planned this. He had arranged it. He had chosen the dress himself, Or rather, he had told his buyer to find something that would make every person in this room understand that they had underestimated him by proxy. It was calculated. It was tactical. It was the kind of move that played on the room's assumptions about what kind of woman a man like him deserved, and it was supposed to feel like chess. It didn't feel like chess. She stopped in front of him and held out his portfolio and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "You planned this," she said. Her voice was low, flat. "Yes. You wanted them to see. I wanted them to understand something." He took the portfolio without looking at it. Whether they understand the right thing is their problem. She looked at him for 1 second longer than was necessary, and then she looked away, and her gaze traveled around the room with the measured calm of someone doing inventory, and Roman watched her do it and felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Because what she was doing wasn't nervousness. Wasn't a woman overwhelmed by suddenly being the most looked at person in a room full of important people. It was assessment. Rapid, professional, systematic assessment of a ballroom full of powerful strangers. He stored that in a place in his mind he'd return to later. The next 2 hours unfolded in a way that Roman had not fully anticipated. He had expected the dress to do its work. He had not expected Selene to do hers. She moved through the room beside him when proximity served some purpose, and away from him when it didn't, and wherever she moved, she generated a gravitational field that pulled conversations toward her and held them there. He watched her speak Italian to a Milanese textile investor who had been conducting himself with the aggressive indifference of someone who believed no one in the room was worth his full attention. The man's expression changed inside of 30 seconds. He leaned forward. He laughed at something she said with the genuine, slightly embarrassed laugh of someone caught off guard by actual wit. She moved on before he had finished laughing. She spoke Russian to 2 men from a St. Petersburg equity group who had been making the rounds with the calculated friendliness of people who were shopping for something specific. Roman watched one of them touch her wrist briefly in the way that foreign businessmen sometimes did, a gesture that walked the line between cultural custom and testing how much they could get away with. Selene looked at the man's hand on her wrist, and then looked at the man with an expression so precisely calibrated that he removed his hand and straightened his jacket and said something to his colleague that made his colleague nod carefully. Roman moved closer. "You speak Russian," he said when she was beside him again. "I speak several things." "You never told me that." "You never asked." She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "You asked me to manage your calendar, coordinate your car service, screen your communications, and be invisible. I was invisible in several languages." There was no edge in her voice, no resentment, which somehow made it worse. He studied her profile, the line of her jaw, the way she held the champagne glass close to her body rather than extended outward, the way people did when they wanted to seem relaxed. She was not performing relaxation. She was not performing anything. "Who taught you to speak Russian?" he asked. "A man I once knew." "What man?" She looked at him with those dark, unremarkable eyes, the eyes that had watched everything for 14 months without ever appearing to watch anything, and said simply, "It was a long time ago." He let it go. He shouldn't have. Vincent Moretti found them near the bar at 9:47. Roman had been aware of Moretti tracking them across the room for the past 40 minutes in the careful, oblique way that men who have survived decades in criminal enterprise track things. Never looking directly, using reflective surfaces and peripheral vision and the movement of other people as a kind of early warning system. Vincent Moretti was 71 years old and had the lean, weathered quality of old rope. He had outlived 3 of his own consiglieri, 2 federal investigations, and a stroke that had left his left hand slightly impaired. He ran the Moretti syndicate from a house in Lake Forest, with a garden his late wife had planted, and which he maintained with meticulous care because it was the only thing left that connected him to something that wasn't negotiated in violence. He was not a man who froze, but when his eyes fell on the necklace at Selene's throat, he froze. Roman noticed it immediately. The way Moretti's forward movement stopped, the way his glass shifted in his grip, not enough to spill, but enough that a careful observer would catch it. The way his eyes, which in 40 years of looking across tables at dangerous men had never shown a thing they didn't mean to show, went briefly empty in the way eyes do when the brain has received information it isn't prepared for and is working very fast to understand it. The necklace was antique, sapphires in a setting that was at least a century old, the deep blue stones surrounded by small diamonds in a configuration that was distinctive enough to be recognizable to anyone who had seen it before. It sat at the base of Selene's throat, and it was the only piece of jewelry she was wearing, and it was the most dangerous thing in the room. Roman didn't know why it was dangerous yet, but he watched Vincent Moretti recover himself and redirect and come toward them with his hand already extended in greeting, and in 30 years of reading rooms he had never seen Vincent Moretti need to recover himself. Roman. Moretti shook his hand with the particular firmness of old men who have decided that a firm handshake is one of the last defenses against obsolescence. His eyes were already moving to Selene. "And this must be Selene Vale," she said, and extended her hand. "Roman's executive assistant." Moretti took her hand, held it. His eyes went to the necklace and stayed there for what was, in social terms, a fraction of a second too long. "Lovely piece," he said. His voice was controlled, perfectly controlled. "Thank you." "Sapphires like that." He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "They're not common." "No," she said. "They're not." There was a pause in which Roman felt the surface of the conversation hiding something much larger beneath it, the way winter ice hides the depth of a lake. "I wonder," Moretti said carefully, "where a woman finds something like that." "It was a gift," Selene said. "From someone special, I imagine." "From someone who is no longer here." Something passed across Moretti's face and was gone. He said something pleasant and general about the evening and excused himself within 60 seconds. Roman watched him walk directly toward a man in a gray suit near the eastern wall and speak to him without preamble, the short, urgent speech of someone delivering information rather than making conversation. Roman turned to Selene. "That necklace," he said. "Where did it come from?" She raised the champagne glass to her lips. "I told you. It was a gift." "From who?" "My mother." "What was your mother's name?" She looked at him. Not sideways, not at the floor, not with the careful deflection she used when she wanted to end a conversation without being rude. She looked directly at him, and for the first time in 14 months, he felt like she was actually looking at him, not managing him, not observing him, but actually seeing him. "Vale," she said. "Isabel Vale." He held her gaze. Something in her answer was structurally correct and fundamentally false, the way a building looks sound from the outside while the load-bearing walls are already compromised, and he was trying to locate the specific lie in it when a hand touched his arm. His security chief, Marcus, appeared at his shoulder. Broad-shouldered, shaved head, the perpetually neutral expression of a man who had learned to deliver bad news calmly. "Problem," Marcus said. "Northeast Terrace." "Now?" Someone made a call from inside the building in the last hour, to a number we've been watching. Marcus's eyes moved briefly to Selene and then back to Roman. "We need 5 minutes." Roman looked at Selene. She was watching the room. "Stay here," he said. She didn't look at him. "I'll be here." He followed Marcus through the service corridor to the Northeast Terrace, which was a covered outdoor space with a view of the rain-soaked garden, and beyond that, the gray swell of the lake in the dark. The wind came off the water and cut through his jacket. Marcus handed him a phone. On the screen was a call log, a number flagged in red. The timestamp was 9:03 p.m. "The call originated inside the building," Marcus said. "We triangulated it to the main ballroom." "Source?" "Unknown. The device isn't registered." "The call went where?" Marcus paused. "To a relay we've connected to the Wolf network." Roman looked at the phone. Adrian Wolf, city councilman, public reformer. The kind of man who held press conferences about civic corruption while running 3 shell companies that laundered money through a network of nonprofit organizations. Roman had been watching Wolf for 8 months, building something that could be used, accumulating the particular kind of evidence that had weight. Someone in the ballroom had called Wolf's people at 9 o'clock. He looked back through the glass doors at the party inside, at the crystal and the candles and the old money families, and behind them, standing alone near the bar with a glass of champagne, Selene Vale, in a silver dress that the room still couldn't quite look away from. He stood in the rain-loud dark of the terrace and made a decision. The decision was not to tell Selene about the call. The decision was not yet to confront her about the necklace or the Russian or the eyes that watched everything and the voice that answered questions without answering them. The decision was to go back inside and stand beside her and let the night continue while he pulled the thread slowly, because that was how you found the thing that unraveled everything. You pulled slowly and you watched what moved. He went back inside. He found her at the bar, alone. She handed him a glass of bourbon without being asked. "Marcus looks worried," she said. "Marcus is always worried." "That's not what I mean." He drank. The bourbon was good. The bar was stocked for people who spent money on bourbon the way other people spent money on art. "Someone made a call tonight," he said, without deciding to say it. He watched her face. "A lot of people made calls tonight," she said. "It's a party. To a number I find interesting." She set down her champagne glass on the bar with a click that was barely audible in the noise of the room. "How interesting?" "Interesting enough?" She was quiet for a moment. The orchestra shifted into something slower, a waltz, and the crowd on the dance floor thinned and reconfigured. "Roman," she said. She didn't look at him. "Whatever you're building toward right now, I want you to know that this isn't the right place for it." "Why not?" "Because the night isn't over yet." She picked up her glass again. "And what comes next is going to require both of us." He looked at her, the line of her profile, the necklace at her throat, the slight tension in her jaw that she controlled well but not perfectly. "That's a strange thing to say," he said. "Strange night," she said. He was still watching her when she looked up suddenly, her eyes going to the northeast corner of the room, and he followed her gaze and saw what she'd seen. Vincent Moretti in close conversation with the man in the gray suit. And next to the man in the gray suit, now, a third man who had not been at this party an hour ago, who had the particular stillness of someone who did not attend parties. "Do you know him?" Roman asked. "No," she said. She said it too quickly, and she knew it and he knew it. And for a moment the two of them stood at the bar in the noise and light of the party, and the air between them was the specific air of two people who have each caught the other lying, and neither has decided yet what to do about it. "Dance with me," she said. He looked at her. "I'm serious," she said. "Dance with me, right now. Because if we stay at this bar for another 40 seconds, Moretti's going to bring that man over here. And once he does, there are going to be questions you're not going to want to answer in public." He set down the bourbon. He took her hand. Her hand was warm and slightly tense, and she moved onto the dance floor with the fluid certainty of someone who had danced this dance before. Not this specific dance, not this specific night, but this particular kind of dance, the one where you're moving in plain sight while everything is happening underneath. Her hand in his felt wrong in a specific way that felt right. "The necklace," he said quietly, close enough that no one around them could hear. "Tell me where it actually came from." She looked straight ahead over his shoulder. Her back was very straight. "My mother gave it to me," she said, "before she died." "And your mother?" "She's been gone 15 years. "What was her name?" A pause. Not long. Half a beat. "She went by many names," Selene said. Toward the end, the orchestra played. The chandeliers threw cold light across the floor. Across the room, Vincent Moretti and the man in the gray suit watched them dance with expressions that Roman could not fully read from here, but that had the quality of a conversation not yet completed. "Selene," he pulled back just enough to look at her face, her dark eyes, the necklace. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell me something true." She looked at him, directly. No deflection. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice was barely above the music. "I've known who you are for longer than I've worked for you. And you have been exactly who I expected you to be, and considerably worse in some ways, and considerably better in others. That is the truest thing I can tell you right now." "That's not an answer." "No," she said. "It's not." He tightened his hand on her waist, not painfully, just enough. After this dance," she interrupted quietly, "you're going to take me out to the balcony and ask me everything you want to know. And I am going to tell you some of it. Not all of it, some of it." Her voice did not waver. "And what I tell you is going to change everything, Roman. Not parts of it, everything." The orchestra reached the end of the phrase and fell into a quieter passage. They continued moving. The room turned slowly around them. "I'm not afraid of what you're going to tell me," he said. She looked at him with something that might have been pity if her eyes were capable of pity, which they didn't seem to be. "Yes, you are," she said. She was right. He was. He didn't know what he was afraid of specifically, but standing with this woman on a dance floor in a room full of people who wanted to use him and use her and use whatever was between them, he felt the particular fear of someone who has been operating under a false set of assumptions and doesn't yet know which assumptions are false. The music shifted again. On the far side of the room, near the service entrance, the man in the gray suit made a phone call. Roman felt Selene's hand tighten almost imperceptibly in his. "Balcony," she said. "Now?" "Right now." They moved toward the terrace together, and behind them the party continued, and the chandeliers threw light across a room full of people, conducting the business of the city while the city's most dangerous man walked beside a woman whose real name he did not yet know, toward a conversation that was going to close a door on everything that had come before it, and open one into something that neither of them was going to be able to walk back from. The balcony door swung shut behind them. The wind off the lake hit them both, and in the sudden dark and cold of the terrace, with the city spread out below them in the rain, Selene Vale turned to face him and said 3 words that made his blood stop. "My name's Laurent." She let that land, watched his face work through it, watched the name move through him the way a name can move through a person when it carries the weight of history, when it isn't just a name but a whole detonated past. "Serafina Laurent," she said, "the youngest daughter, the one they never found." Her voice was steady. Her hands were still. "And I've been inside your organization for 14 months, Roman, not because you hired me, because I chose you." The rain fell. The city glittered below them, all those lights indifferent to the fact that the world had just rearranged itself on a terrace 40 feet above the street. Roman looked at her face and understood, with the absolute clarity of a man whose survival instincts had never once failed him, that he should kill her right now. His hand moved, not toward a weapon, toward her face. He kissed her, and in the moment their mouths met, with the wind and the rain and the city doing whatever the city was always doing, they were both briefly and completely out of the parts they had been playing. And what was left was something that had nothing tactical about it at all. When they broke apart, her eyes were open, watching him. "You understand what this means," she said. "Yes," he said. "What I just told you changes everything. You should want me dead. I know. You don't. No." She looked at him for a long moment, and he looked at her, and the city turned beneath them in its rain and its neon, and somewhere inside the estate, a glass shattered on a hard floor and the sound carried out through the sealed doors, and both of them turned their heads at the same moment with the same instinct. Not an accident. The lights inside went dark. Then the screaming began. The lights inside the Valkyrie estate died in sequence, not all at once, which was worse. The chandeliers went first, those enormous extravagant things that had been throwing cold prismatic light across the ballroom all evening, and then the wall sconces, and then whatever backup system should have engaged in the first 4 seconds didn't engage, and the building went dark. The way buildings go dark when someone has done something specific and deliberate to the electrical system rather than simply tripping a breaker. Roman had the balcony door open before the last sconce died. He moved into the darkness with the particular economy of a man whose body had spent decades making decisions slightly ahead of his conscious mind. And his hand found Selene's wrist, and he pulled her inside behind him without asking and without pausing, and she came without resistance, which told him something about her that confirmed something he'd already started to understand. Inside, the ballroom had shifted from elegant chaos to genuine panic in the span of about 12 seconds. He could hear it before his eyes adjusted. The pitch of the room changing, voices climbing from surprised to frightened, the sound of chairs scraping back and heels on marble, and at least 2 glasses breaking against the floor. Someone near the northeast wall was using a phone as a flashlight, and the pale blue beam swept across faces that looked nothing like they had 60 seconds ago, stripped of the social performance that expensive evenings required, showing instead the raw animal confusion of wealthy people who had never actually been in danger before and didn't know which muscles to use. Roman knew which muscles to use. Marcus. He kept his voice below the noise of the room. Marcus materialized from the dark like he'd been waiting exactly there, which he probably had. 2 men at the main entrance, Marcus said. Armed. They came through the service gate on the south side. We have 4 guys on the perimeter, but they came in through the catering route, which means someone told them about the catering route. How many total? We're still counting. 6 we've confirmed. Could be more. The guests. East corridor leads to the wine cellar. Reinforced door, but we can push maybe 40 people through before. Do it. Anyone who doesn't want to move, let them make their own decisions. Roman looked around the room. His eyes had adjusted. The emergency lighting in the corridor had come on. Thin red strips along the baseboards that did almost nothing but at least define the edges of the space. Where's Moretti? Lost him when the lights went. Roman looked at Selene Mouchoum. She was standing very close to him, not from fear. Her breathing was controlled. Her posture was upright. Her eyes were moving across the room in the same systematic way he'd noticed earlier at the bar. But because the space between them had simply closed and neither of them had opened it again. You know what this is? He said to her. Not a question. She looked at him. Yes. Is it for you or for me? A pause that was a fraction too long. Both, she said. Almost certainly both. He held her gaze for 1 second. Stay with Marcus. No. That wasn't a... I'm not staying with Marcus. Her voice was quiet, but it had the specific quality of a statement that has already finished being negotiated. I'm staying with you, and you need to stop wasting time arguing about it because those men at the entrance are not going to wait. Marcus looked at Roman. Roman looked at Selene. In the dark and the chaos of the ballroom with the red strips of emergency lighting painting everything in the color of bad outcomes, he made the calculation, and the calculation said she was right, and he hated that it said that. Fine, he said. You stay on my left. You do not move independently. You do not... Roman. She put her hand flat on his chest, pressed once, firm. I know how to do this. That was the part that kept hitting him in the place where his instincts lived. She knew how to do this. She knew how to do a lot of things that a secretary from a small apartment in the Gold Coast had no business knowing. They moved. The East Corridor was filling with frightened people being herded in the patient, practiced way that Marcus's men had clearly rehearsed. Firm hands on shoulders, low voices, no running because running in the dark in a confined space turned a controlled evacuation into a pileup. Roman moved against the flow, toward the main entrance, and Selene moved beside him with her left shoulder almost brushing the wall, keeping herself in the peripheral, covering the angle he wasn't covering. He didn't comment on it. He filed it. At the junction of the main foyer and the corridor to the kitchen, they found the first body. It was a man in a waiter's uniform, face down, and the dark stain spreading from beneath him across the marble floor caught the emergency lighting and looked black rather than red. Selene stopped. Roman watched her crouch beside the body and press 2 fingers to the side of the man's throat and hold them there for 3 seconds. Gone, she said. You checked for a pulse. Someone should. She stood. Her voice hadn't changed. He was carrying a tray of champagne 20 minutes ago. I saw him. Roman looked at her. There was something in the way she said that. Not the sentiment of it, but the control, the way she had converted what should have been shock into information. That made him think of people he had known who had come through things that required you to learn how to do that conversion or not come through them at all. They kept moving. The main foyer had 2 of Roman's men down on the floor. Not dead, one was moving, and one of the armed intruders standing near the front entrance with his weapon raised, scanning. Roman took in the positions, the angles, the doors, the distance, and was still calculating when Selene picked up a marble bookend from the hall table beside her and threw it with the precise, understated efficiency of someone who had done target work and understood both the mechanics of throwing and the specific vulnerability of a man whose weapon is pointed in a different direction. The intruder went down hard, his weapon skidding across the marble. Roman stared at her. She walked past him toward the fallen weapon, picked it up, checked the chamber with practiced hands, and looked up at him with an expression that was almost impatient. We need to find a position, she said. He crossed the foyer in 4 steps and grabbed her arm and turned her to face him and said, low and direct, Who are you? I told you who I am. You told me a name. A name is not... My family had a security detail from the time I was 8 years old, she said. Do you understand what that means? It means I grew up learning things. It means I had instructors. It means that what you watched me do just now is the least of what I know how to do." She held his gaze and didn't blink. The Laurent family did not survive 15 years in this city's underworld by being fragile, Roman. We survived by being prepared. And then one night someone decided that being prepared wasn't enough and took everything anyway. He let go of her arm. "One of Moretti's men started this," he said. "Maybe." The call Marcus found. The number connected to Wolf's network. Someone in that ballroom made that call. "Yes." "You knew about Wolf." She looked at him for a moment. The foyer around them was dark and cold, and from somewhere deeper in the building there were sounds, voices, movement, the particular percussion of a situation that hadn't finished developing yet. "I've known about Wolf for 3 years," she said. The words landed in him like something physical. 3 years, he said. "I came to you because you were the closest point to him that I could reach without being killed on approach. Your organization intersects with 3 of Wolf's financial channels. If I could get close to you, I could get close to those channels. If I could get close to those channels..." She stopped, breathed once. "I could find the paper trail that proves what he did, what he ordered, who he paid." Roman was very still. The still that meant he was processing something he wasn't sure he was going to be able to process cleanly. "You used me," he said. "Yes. For 3 years you... 14 months inside your organization, 3 years building toward it." She said it without apology and without pleasure. Just fact. "I didn't know you when I started. I only knew what you represented. And now..." She looked at him and that thing crossed her face again. That thing he kept catching and couldn't fully name. "Now is complicated," she said. A door crashed open somewhere in the east wing and both of them moved simultaneously. She went left, he went right, weapon already in his hand from the holster beneath his jacket, and they held position on either side of the corridor mouth until Marcus came through at a controlled jog with 2 men behind him. "They're pulling back," Marcus said, breathing hard. 4 confirmed down. The other 2 retreated through the service gate. "It's..." He stopped, looked at the unconscious man on the foyer floor, looked at Selene. "It's contained. For now." "For now," Roman repeated. "The police are going to be here in 6 minutes. Then we have 5 minutes. Roman looked at Selene. "Where's Moretti?" They found him in the estate's private study, a room at the back of the building that had been unlocked, which meant someone with access to the estate staff had arranged for it to be unlocked. Moretti was sitting in one of the room's leather chairs with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and a glass of something on the side table beside him. And he looked at Roman when the door opened with the expression of a man who had been waiting and who had used the waiting time to arrive at a decision. "Roman," he said. He didn't look at Selene, or rather, he did not look directly at her, but his entire body was aware of her in the room in the way bodies are aware of things they are working hard to not react to. "Vincent," Roman said, "the men at the entrance." "I don't know anything about that." "That's interesting because I don't know anything about that," Moretti repeated, and this time there was a weight in his voice that meant something different. It meant, "I'm telling you this carefully, and I need you to hear the specific thing I'm telling you. What happens in this building tonight has nothing to do with me. Whatever you think you saw, whatever Marcus told you about calls and numbers..." "What do you know about the Wolf Network?" Roman said. Moretti's jaw tightened. "Sit down, Roman." "I'll stand." "Then stand, but stop performing for..." He stopped. Finally looked at Selene, really looked at her, his voice dropped. "Take that necklace off." The room went very still. Selene reached up slowly and unclasped the necklace and held it in her palm, the sapphires catching what little light the desk lamp threw. She didn't speak. She just looked at Moretti with the flat, patient attention of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a specific moment. Moretti looked at the necklace for a long time. "Your mother," he said finally. "How?" "She hid it," Selene said, "before the end. She sent it to a woman in Evanston she trusted. I found it 2 years ago." "Your mother is dead." "Yes. They're all dead, Vincent." Her voice was even. Completely, impossibly even. You know that better than most. Moretti set down his glass. He looked at his hands, at the one that was slightly impaired from the stroke. I did not order what happened to your family, he said. You need to believe that. I don't need to believe anything you say. It's the truth. Lots of people tell me things that are the truth while leaving out the parts that make the truth useful. She took one step toward him. Who did order it? Serafina. Don't call me that. Fast. Flat. Like a door closing. Not that name, not from you. Moretti looked at her for a long moment with something in his face that was not quite grief but lived in the same neighborhood. You were 9 years old the last time I saw you, he said, running through your father's house with your shoes untied. I was 8, and my father is dead. I know he's dead. Because of Wolf, Roman said. Moretti looked at him. This is not a conversation I can have in 6 minutes the police are going to be in this building, and this is the last quiet room in it, Roman said. So you are going to tell me what you know about Adrian Wolf and the Laurent massacre right now, Vincent, or I'm going to have a very detailed conversation with the federal contact I have been maintaining for the past 8 months specifically for a moment that required leverage. The silence that followed had weight to it. Moretti reached for his glass, drank, set it down again. Wolf came to the Moretti family in 2009, Kikkan, he said. Before he was a councilman, before he was anything publicly. He had financing, offshore, structured through 3 shells, legitimate on the surface. He wanted to buy positioning inside 3 specific municipal contracts: infrastructure, port access rights, waste management licensing. Moretti's voice had gone to the flat register of a man reading from a document he has memorized. He needed someone to negotiate with the sitting organizations, to smooth the path. I was one of the people he approached. And the Laurents, Roman said. Dominic Laurent refused him. Moretti said it simply. He heard Wolf's proposal, and he refused it, and he told him why, in a way that was... Dominic was never careful with his words. He was a brilliant man, and he had no patience for people he didn't respect. He told Wolf that he would not work with a man whose finances didn't have a visible source because invisible money meant invisible accountability, and invisible accountability was how you ended up owned. He paused. Wolf smiled and thanked him for his time. And 3 months later, Selene said. 3 months later. Moretti looked at the necklace still in her hand. The Laurent house burned. The room breathed. He used the Vesper organization, Selene said. Her eyes stayed on Moretti, but Roman felt the sentence land on him the way sentences land when they are directed at you through a third party, more precisely because the indirection leaves no room for defense. Or people inside it. People who were inside it at the time, Moretti said carefully. He was looking at Roman now. Roman was 29 in 2009. He was still consolidating. Not everything under his name was fully under his control. Roman said nothing. Someone in your organization, Selene said, took Wolf's money and burned my family's house with my family inside it. The sentence was structurally complete and emotionally empty, and both of those qualities made it more devastating than if she had screamed it. Roman turned and walked to the window and stood with his back to the room and looked out at the rain-dark garden and breathed through his nose and tried to locate himself in the geography of what had just been said. He had built his organization on specific principles. One of them was loyalty. One of them was accountability. The idea that someone inside his structure had taken a contract against a civilian family, against children, and he had not known, had not been told, had protected that person without knowing what he was protecting. Who? He said to the window. Moretti didn't answer immediately. Who? Roman said again, and the word had changed, had acquired something underneath it that filled the room. I don't know for certain, Moretti said. I have suspicions. I have the name of a man who was paid through one of Wolf's early shells and who I believe was inside your operation at the time. But I have never had proof that held. Give me the name. If I give you the name and you're wrong, Roman turned from the window. Give me the name, Vincent. Moretti looked at Selene. She gave him nothing. No permission, no warning, no indication of anything except the patient, absolute attention of a woman who had been waiting for this for 15 years and had learned that patience was the only thing that didn't rot. Carver, Moretti said. Daniel Carver. He ran logistics for your South Side operation in 2008 and 2009. Roman went very still. Because Daniel Carver didn't run logistics for his Southside operation in 2008 and 2009. Daniel Carver ran logistics for his Southside operation right now. He was in this building tonight. He had been in this building all evening, managing the car coordination and the driver rotation and the external security perimeter, because those were the things Daniel Carver had always done, reliably and without drama for 11 years. And Roman had trusted him with those things because Roman had built his organization on specific principles, one of which was loyalty, and he had believed in Daniel Carver's loyalty with a completeness that now felt like falling. He was aware distantly of Selene watching him understand this. He was aware of the particular quality of her attention. Not triumph, not vindication, not the satisfaction of a plan confirmed. Something quieter. Something that looked almost like the specific sadness of being right about a terrible thing. The police sirens reached the building's perimeter. "We need to move," Marcus said from the doorway. Roman looked at Selene. She had closed her hand around the necklace, the sapphires hidden in her fist. "Carver coordinated the perimeter tonight," he said. "Yes," she said. "The men who came in through the catering route." "The catering route that your perimeter manager would have known about," she said. "Yes." "He tried to kill us both." "He tried to kill me," she said. "And he tried to do it in a way that looked like someone targeting you, so that whatever happened, the story went in a direction that protected Wolf." She looked at him steadily. "He's been doing that for 15 years, Roman, making things point away from the people who paid him. You just didn't have a reason to see it before." Outside, the sirens were pulling up the drive. Red and blue light began strobing through the study's windows, painting everything in pulses. "He's still on the perimeter," Roman said. "Yes. If he gets to Wolf before he'll tell Wolf the job failed. Wolf will go to ground, and every piece of evidence I've spent 3 years building toward will become inaccessible within 48 hours. She uncurled her hand. The necklace lay in her palm, the sapphires dark in the strobing light. "This ends tonight, or it doesn't end." Roman looked at the necklace, at her face, at the woman he had employed for 14 months and never seen, who had watched him from a careful distance and understood everything and said nothing and waited with the patience of someone who had converted grief into a long, cold project and carried it without breaking. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone, dialed a number, waited 1 ring. "Carver?" he said when the line picked up. His voice was absolutely normal, completely controlled, the voice of 11 years of practiced deception. "The police are here. I need you inside. Come through the main entrance." A pause on the line, then, "Copy that. 2 minutes." Roman ended the call. He looked at Marcus. "When he comes through the door, you take him. Not the police, us. He doesn't get to say anything to anyone that we haven't heard first." Marcus nodded once. "And Wolf," Selene said. "Wolf is next." Roman looked at her. "But I need to hear it from Carver first. I need to hear it from his mouth." She held his gaze. Something moved through her expression and settled. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They stood in the strobing light of the study, the police outside, the sirens filling the air, and somewhere in the dark of the estate's main entrance, a man who had spent 11 years standing at Roman Vesper's right hand was walking toward a door he didn't know was the last one he'd ever walk through freely. And downstairs on the estate's lower level, in the secured communications room that the event organizers used for AV management and which had been unlocked by someone with staff access, a phone was ringing on a table beside an open laptop. The laptop screen showed a single message in a chat window. It said, "Job incomplete. Extract protocol active. You have 4 hours." The phone rang twice, 3 times, then it stopped, because the person it was calling was already in motion, already past the perimeter, already past the retreating police vehicles pulling into the drive, already moving through the rain toward a car parked 2 blocks east on a street with no cameras. And when Roman's men found the communications room 11 minutes later, the laptop was still open and the message was still on the screen, but the chair in front of it was empty and the phone on the table had a cracked screen from where it had been dropped. And the door to the rear stairwell door was still swinging. Roman hit it with his shoulder at full stride and took the stairs 3 at a time into the dark below, Marcus half a step behind him. And behind Marcus, the sound of Selene's heels on concrete, doing something that heels on concrete shouldn't be able to do, which was move that fast and that quietly. The stairwell smelled of old stone and something chemical, cleaning fluid or electrical insulation, and the emergency strips along the baseboards threw just enough red light to see the next 3 steps and nothing beyond them. The lower level opened into a service corridor. Low ceiling, exposed pipes, the kind of space that exists in every large estate and that guests never see and staff learn to navigate by memory. Roman stopped at the bottom of the stairs and listened. Nothing. Not nothing like empty. Nothing like whatever had been here had finished being here. He moved left along the corridor toward the communications room door, which was standing open, and went inside and saw exactly what Marcus had described. The laptop, the message on the screen, the cracked phone on the table, the chair pushed back at the angle of someone who had left in a hurry, but not in a panic. In a hurry with a direction. That was different. He read the message twice. Job incomplete. Extract protocol active. You have 4 hours. Someone warned them, Marcus said from the doorway. Someone inside the perimeter. Roman didn't look up from the screen. Carver didn't run. Someone told him not to come in. Then he heard your call and he heard my call and he knew exactly what it meant. Roman straightened up. 11 years, he's known the way I operate for 11 years. He knew what that voice meant. The voice. The controlled, normal voice that Roman used when things were not controlled or normal. He had used it on 3 specific occasions in 11 years, and each time the person on the receiving end of it had understood, too late, that the absence of anger in Roman Vesper's voice was not reassurance. It was the sound of a decision already made. Carver had understood. And Carver had run, which meant Carver was already in a car, already moving toward whatever hole Wolf had prepared for exactly this contingency, and every second Roman stood in this basement room was a second Carver spent increasing the distance between himself and accountability. I need his location, Roman said. His phone went dark 7 minutes ago. He has a second phone. Everyone in my operation carries a second phone, Marcus, because I require it, and the requirement exists so that I can find people when I need to find them. He looked at Marcus directly. Find it. Marcus was already on his own phone. Roman turned to Selene. She was standing just inside the communications room door, her back to the wall, the fallen phone from the table now in her hand. She had picked it up without being asked and was doing something to it, not using it, examining it, turning it over in the specific way of someone checking for something they expect to find. What are you looking for? He said. This phone was left deliberately. She turned it over again. The cracked screen caught the light. The crack is fresh. Someone dropped it on purpose, made it look abandoned. But the crack pattern is wrong for a drop. It's wrong for impact with a flat surface. She looked up. Someone pressed the screen against an edge, a corner, to crack it in a way that looked like a drop. Why? Because a broken phone suggests panic. Panic suggests the person running didn't have time to take their equipment. If they didn't have time to take their equipment, they weren't prepared for this outcome. She set the phone back on the table. But they were prepared. This whole room was prepared. The laptop message, the open door, the cracked phone. It's a scene, staged. Roman looked at the room, at the message on the laptop screen. He had read it and accepted it as genuine because it looked genuine, because the staging was good, because he had been operating inside a high-stress situation for the past 45 minutes, and high-stress situations narrowed the aperture through which you processed information. He had been managed. He looked at the laptop screen again. Job incomplete. Extract protocol active. You have 4 hours. It's not a message to Carver, he said. No, she said. It's a message to us, or to whoever found this room. She folded her arms. It says, your target is running, your window is closing, go in the direction we want you to go. And the direction they want us to go is after Carver. Away from something else. She looked at the laptop. Away from something in this building that we haven't found yet. Roman looked at Marcus. Marcus lowered his phone. Carver's second phone is pinging, he said. Moving northwest. He's on the 90. Going where? At this trajectory, O'Hare. He's leaving the city, Roman said. Or he wants us to think he is. Selene moved to the laptop. She didn't touch the keyboard, just leaned over and read the open browser tabs visible along the top of the screen. Roman came to stand beside her. 3 tabs. A local news site, a map application with a route already loaded, and what appeared to be a financial transfer interface, the kind that existed on the private side of certain institutional banking platforms. The transfer interface was open to a completed transaction record. The transfer had gone through at 9:47 p.m., 40 minutes ago, while the gala was in full noise upstairs. The amount was not what caught Roman's attention. What caught his attention was the destination account identifier, a 16-digit string that he had seen before, in a different context, in a document that lived in a file in his office, safe at home. He had seen that account number in the financial records of his own organization's infrastructure trust. "That's my account," he said. Selene looked at him. "That transfer went into an account I control," he said slowly. "An infrastructure trust I use for legitimate property development. The account exists under a clean corporate identity." He looked at the amount on the screen. "Someone just moved $400,000 into my clean account from an origin I don't recognize, and they did it tonight from this room, while my men were busy with the attack upstairs." Selene straightened up. "Wolf is building a case against you." "He's been building one." "No, he's finishing one." She turned to face him. "The attack tonight wasn't primarily an assassination attempt. It was a distraction, a complicated, expensive distraction designed to get your organization's attention pointed outward, while someone inside this building made a transfer that will look, to any financial investigator, like a payment received by Roman Vesper for a contract job." Roman was very still. "What contract job?" he said, even though he already knew, even though the answer was already there in the shape of the past 15 years, in the shape of a burned house and a family and a surviving daughter who had spent 3 years getting close enough to touch the truth. "The Laurent massacre," Selene said. The words were quiet. The room was quiet. From upstairs came the muffled sounds of police and people and the administrative noise of an emergency being organized, and none of it touched the quiet inside this room. "He's going to frame you for ordering it," she said. "A payment received in 2009. That's what the prosecutors will look for. That's what he'll manufacture. But a payment received tonight from an account traceable back to his network, transferred into an account in your name. That's the corroborating transaction. That's the piece that makes the 2009 records look legitimate by comparison. That's the piece that makes everything stick. He's been waiting to make this transfer, until he had something that could explain why you received it. The transfer is labeled." She pointed to the screen without touching it. "Look at the reference field." Roman looked. The reference field contained 8 words. "Final settlement. Outstanding balance. Infrastructure services rendered. 2009. He stood very still and breathed and let the engineering of it become clear in his mind. The way engineering became clear when you stopped reacting to it and started reading it. Wolf had spent 15 years preparing this. A payment record, a reference field, an account in Roman's name, and a night when Roman's organization was visibly and violently active, a night that would appear, in the reconstruction, to be the night Roman had received final payment for a 15-year-old contract. The gala had been selected for this. Not randomly. Tonight had been selected because Roman was here, because his operation was active, because when the police reviewed the evening's events, they would find an armed incursion connected to Roman's world, financial transfers connected to Roman's accounts, and a dead family's surviving daughter in Roman's company. Selene in Roman's company. He turned to look at her and found her already watching him with the expression of someone who has arrived at the same conclusion from a different direction. "He knows you're here," Roman said. "He's known for a while, I think." "How long?" "I don't know exactly." She said it without flinching, which meant she had already made peace with the uncertainty of it. "I was careful. I am careful. But Wolf has been running intelligence operations in this city for a decade. The possibility that he identified me..." She stopped, restarted. "The possibility that he identified me and chose not to move against me immediately because I was more useful as a piece on the board than as a removed threat. That possibility has been something I've been living with." Roman looked at her. "You knew he might be using you," he said. "I knew it was possible." "And you came anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him for a long moment, and what crossed her face in that moment was not the controlled, calibrated expression she had maintained through the entire evening. It was something older and less managed, something that had to do with a house on fire and a family and an 8-year-old girl with her shoes untied who had grown up in the specific way you grow up when everything is taken from you at once. Because doing nothing was not something I was capable of anymore, she said. And because if Wolf was going to use me as a piece on his board, I was going to make sure I was the most expensive piece on that board to move. The sound from upstairs changed, heavier footsteps, the specific cadence of police officers doing room-by-room checks rather than crowd management. We have about 3 minutes before someone finds this stairwell, Marcus said from the door. The laptop, Roman said. Can you pull the transfer records? Already photographed, Selene said. She held up her phone. She had photographed the screen while he was processing. She had done it quietly and without announcement the way she did everything, and he added it to the list of things he was still catching up to about her. The origin account, he said. If we can trace it back to Wolf's network, that's 3 years of work, she said. I have most of it, not all of it. The missing piece is a signatory connection between Wolf's political identity and the shell structure he used in 2009. Without that connection, everything I have is circumstantial. Where is that connection? It exists, she said. It's documented, but the document is not something I have access to directly. She paused. It's in Wolf's possession. In a specific location I have reason to believe I know. Where? The Laurent Opera House. Roman went very quiet. The Laurent Opera House. The building that had carried his family's name until the family stopped existing to maintain it. Abandoned for 12 years. A landmark designation that prevented demolition but provided no funding for preservation, sitting on the south side of the city in a state of expensive official decay. Roman knew the building. He knew it the way you knew landmarks. By sight, by address, by the peripheral awareness of a significant thing you had never had reason to approach directly. He looked at Selene and understood. In the specific way understanding sometimes arrived all at once rather than incrementally, that this was where it had always been going. He keeps documents there, Roman said. He keeps a specific kind of document there, she said. Wolf owns the building. He acquired it through a trust in 2014, quietly, without public announcement, using the same kind of shell structure he used for everything. He has used it as a storage location for physical records he doesn't trust to digital systems. She held his gaze. I found this out 8 months ago. I've been trying to get inside ever since. It's guarded, not visibly. No obvious security presence, nothing that would draw attention to a derelict building. But monitored. How? Cameras, pressure sensors on the perimeter, 2 men who rotate through on irregular schedules, which means standard surveillance patterns don't work. She breathed once. I've been waiting for a moment when Wolf's attention was directed somewhere else. Tonight. Tonight, she said, while he thinks we're chasing Carver, while he thinks the transfer has done its work and we're either arrested or running. If we move right now, Marcus, Roman said. I heard it, Marcus said. Carver. I can send 2 men after the phone signal. Keep him occupied. Buy you time. Marcus looked at Roman with the expression of someone who has processed a large amount of information and arrived at a position of unhappy loyalty. Roman, if this goes wrong tonight, it's not going to go wrong. If it does, Roman looked at him. Marcus had been with him for 9 years. He had a daughter in Naperville who did gymnastics, and a wife who made tamales at Christmas, and an apartment in Wicker Park that he paid for with money that came from doing things he would never tell his wife about. He was not a man of politics or principle. He was a man of function. He did what needed to be done, and he did it well, and he asked, in return, only that the person he did it for was honest about what was being asked. If it goes wrong, Roman said, you take your family and you go. You don't wait for instructions. You go. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, copy. He left. Roman looked at Selene. She was already pulling on the coat that one of his men had retrieved from the estate's coat check, her wool coat, the one she had worn in, the one that had hidden the silver dress from the room until she was ready to be seen. She was buttoning it with quick, economical movements, and she was not looking at him. The Opera House, he said. Yes. You've had a plan for getting inside. I've had 3 plans. They all had problems. Which one has the fewest problems? She looked up, met his eyes. The one where I'm not alone. He reached for his jacket, which someone had hung on the back of the communications room door, and checked the weapon in his holster and adjusted the jacket over it and looked at himself for 1 second in the dark reflection of the laptop screen. A man in a good suit with water still in his hair from the rain and an expression that had passed through several things in the last 2 hours and settled somewhere that didn't have a clean name. They came up through a side exit that led out onto the estate's service road and moved through the dark to the car Marcus had staged there. A sedan, black, anonymous, not one of the armored vehicles that could be identified as Roman's fleet. Selene got in the passenger side and gave him the route without being asked, the opera house address from memory, routing through side streets that kept them off the main arteries where police presence would be heaviest in the next hour. Roman drove. The city was wet and dark and continuous outside the windows, the kind of city that never fully stopped even when something violent had happened to part of it, just redistributed its energy, flowed around the disruption, kept moving. Streetlights on pooled water. A bus shelter with 3 people in it waiting for something that wasn't coming. A 24-hour pharmacy with its fluorescent interior making a white rectangle in the dark. They drove in silence for 4 minutes. The signatory document, Roman said. What exactly is it? A physical contract, she said, executed in 2009 between a shell company called Harrow Capital Advisors and a private security and logistics firm called Meridian Group. Meridian Group provided what was described in the contract as site management and environmental remediation services for a property on the south side. The Laurent House. The contract is signed by the principal of Harrow Capital. She looked out the window. Harrow Capital's principal, at the time of signing, was Adrian Wolfe. Before he entered public office, before he became untouchable. She paused. The contract was executed on paper. 2 copies. Wolfe kept both. The man who negotiated it on behalf of Meridian Group received a significant payment and died in 2013 in what was recorded as a boating accident on Lake Michigan. Convenient. Wolfe has a talent for convenient accidents. And Carver was Meridian Group's operational contact. He was the man who actually managed the... She stopped. Her jaw tightened fractionally. He managed the execution of the contract. The word execution hung in the car's interior. And he's been inside my organization since 2008, Roman said. He came in before the Laurent contract. I believe he was placed. She turned to look at him. I believe Wolfe put him inside your organization deliberately, before the contract, so that the execution could be attributed to a Vesper operation, so that if anyone ever started asking questions, the trail led to you. Roman's hands were steady on the wheel. His hands were always steady. He had trained that into them over years because unsteady hands in his profession were a liability. And the training had become so deep that his hands remained steady even when everything else in him was not. He had carried a traitor for 11 years, had trusted him, had given him responsibilities that required trust, had defended him implicitly by continuing to employ him, had structured his operation in ways that assumed Carver's loyalty because Carver's loyalty had never once given him a reason to question it. The patience of that. The patience Wolfe had exercised, placing a man, waiting a decade, keeping the man in place, letting him become trusted, letting the trust become deep enough that when the time came to use it, the structure would hold. He's a careful man, Roman said. Yes. Patient. Exceptionally. The kind of patient that comes from being certain that no one is looking. She was quiet for a moment. He's been certain for 15 years. He had reason to be. Until you. Until me. Roman turned onto a wider road heading south. The rain had thinned to something more like suspended moisture. Not quite drizzle, just wet air, the kind that accumulated invisibly on surfaces without appearing to fall. You're 3 years, he said, building toward getting inside my organization. What did that look like? Research first. 2 years of building a complete false identity. Selene Vale is documented back 14 years. School records, employment history, a former address in Cincinnati, a reference network of people I had spent months cultivating who would confirm her existence if called. She said it the way someone describes a construction project, the specific satisfaction of craftsmanship without warmth. The identity is clean. I built it to survive scrutiny from the kind of people who are good at scrutiny. People like me. People like Marcus. You don't do your own background checks, Roman. You have people who do them. I built the identity to survive Marcus's people. He thought about that, about the thoroughness of it, about the 3 years and the patience and the false Cincinnati address and the reference network, all of it constructed with the precise, sustained effort of someone who had converted the worst thing that had ever happened to them into a project. "How old were you," he said, "when it happened?" She didn't answer immediately. "8," she said. "I told Moretti 8. It was actually 9. I always say 8. A pause. "I don't know why I always say 8. Maybe because 8 sounds younger. Maybe because some part of me wants people to understand how young I was." She turned to look out her window. "I was staying with a family friend in Oak Park that night, a woman named Clara, who my mother trusted. I was sick, a fever, ordinary, the kind children have. My mother didn't want me at the house because my father was having a difficult meeting and she wanted me comfortable and away from the tension." She breathed, steady, measured. "Clara heard the news on the radio at 6 in the morning. She didn't tell me immediately. She waited until I was fully awake, and then she sat on the edge of the bed and she held my hand and she told me. Ici, uma sa." Roman said nothing. "Clara moved us 3 times in the next month," Selene said. She understood what the family name meant in the context of what had happened, that a surviving child was either a loose end or leverage, and either way it was dangerous to be findable. A pause. "She was right. There were 2 attempts to locate me in the first year. Both failed. Clara was a more careful woman than she appeared. Where is she now?" "She died 4 years ago. Cancer. She was 73. A brief silence. "She was the last person in my life who knew both who I was and who I had been." Roman drove. "Until Moretti," he said. "Moretti knew me as a child. Whether that counts," she let the sentence go. "He's not my person. He was my father's contemporary, and he tolerated me the way older men tolerate children who are present at adult occasions. The recognition on his face tonight was the recognition of someone who has seen a ghost in a situation they weren't prepared for." He seemed genuinely disturbed by the necklace. "He was. He knew the necklace. He'd seen my mother wear it." She reached into her coat pocket and closed her hand around it. Roman could see the slight movement of her fist. "My mother was a woman who understood the value of beautiful things as practical objects. She wore good jewelry because good jewelry was portable wealth. She understood that in the life she had married into, the moment might come when portable wealth was the difference between options and no options." She paused. She was right about that too. Clara sold 2 pieces to fund the moves and the new documents. She kept this one because she said it looked like me, whatever that means. The Laurent Opera House appeared on the left, at the end of a long block of mixed commercial and residential buildings. A wide, dark facade with classical columns and sealed arched windows, the building's original grandeur still visible in its bones despite the years of vacancy. No lights, no visible activity. The marquee above the entrance, which had once held the names of performers, held nothing now except 2 rusted letter tracks and the ghost of old glue. Roman drove past it without stopping. He went 2 blocks, turned, came around the block to approach from the east, where a narrow service alley ran along the building's right side toward what had been the stage entrance. He stopped the car. They sat in the dark and looked at the alley. "Camera?" Selene said. "At the alley entrance, motion activated, 45-second reset cycle. The coverage angle doesn't reach the first 10 feet of the alley if you come in close to the right wall." She reached into the interior pocket of her coat and produced what appeared to be a folded schematic. Actual paper, hand-drawn, the kind of document that existed because she had learned not to trust digital storage for things that mattered. She unfolded it on her knee. "The stage entrance has a padlock that was changed in 2022 to a model I have a bypass for. Inside, the stage-level corridor leads directly to the administrative wing. Wolf's storage is in the old general manager's office on the 2nd level." Roman looked at the schematic. It was precise. Detailed in a way that required either professional training or the kind of obsessive personal study that amounted to the same thing. "How many times have you been inside?" he asked. "Never," she said. "This is constructed from blueprints, satellite imaging, and 2 conversations with a city preservation officer who had conducted interior inspections and who believed he was helping me write a grant application to restore the building." She looked at him. "It's as accurate as I can make it without having been inside." As accurate as you can make it, he repeated. Yes. That's not the same as accurate. No, she said. It's not. He looked at the schematic for another moment. At the camera angle notations, the lock specifications, the path through the building marked in pencil with alternative routes in lighter pencil beside it. The guards, he said. You said irregular rotation. Based on the pattern I observed over 6 weeks, the rotation happens roughly every 4 hours, and the last rotation I clocked was at approximately, she checked her watch, 7:40, which means we are either between rotations with roughly 90 minutes of window or we are approaching a rotation and have 15 minutes. You don't know which. I don't know which. Roman looked at the building's dark facade, at the sealed windows and the columns and the old marquee with its rusted tracks. He thought about what it meant to be a 9-year-old girl who had grown up into a woman capable of constructing this, of carrying this for this long, of walking into his organization and waiting 14 months without breaking. He thought about Daniel Carver, who was moving northwest on the 90, or appearing to move northwest on the 90, and who was connected by a contract signed in this building's history to the burned house of a family whose name was still on the facade. He thought about Adrian Wolfe in whatever position of safety he had arranged for himself, certain that the evening staging was working, that Roman was either arrested or running or chasing a signal, that the 4-hour window was buying him enough time to complete whatever the extract protocol actually meant. He thought about the transfer record on the laptop, final settlement, outstanding balance, infrastructure services rendered, 2009. He opened the car door. Stay close, he said. Always, she said, and she said it with enough dryness that it should have been a deflection, but it landed somewhere more complicated than that, and they both let it. They moved into the alley close to the right wall. Selene slightly ahead because she had the schematic and he had the weapon, and those were their respective competencies for the next 90 seconds. And the camera at the alley entrance did not trigger, and the stage door padlock responded to the tool Selene produced from her coat, the way things respond when someone has spent considerable time understanding their specific vulnerabilities. The door opened. The dark inside the Laurent Opera House was complete and old and enormous, the kind of dark that had been accumulating in a closed space for over a decade, dense with it, the smell of dust and damp plaster and old velvet, and something underneath those things that Roman could not name, but that Selene, stepping across the threshold behind him, breathed in once through her nose with an expression that passed and was gone before he could read it. They moved through the dark with Selene's hand-drawn schematic and Roman's phone light held close to the floor, along the stage corridor toward the administrative stairs, and the building around them was quiet with the specific quiet of a space that had once held enormous amounts of human sound, and still carried the shape of it in its walls. Second level. The general manager's office door was locked with a newer deadbolt that had not been on the schematic, and Roman looked at it and looked at Selene, and she reached past him with a different tool and spent 40 seconds on the lock with the focused attention of someone who is very good at one specific thing, and the lock gave. The office inside was clean, orderly. Someone used this space regularly. A metal shelving unit along the left wall held numbered file boxes in a system that was logical and labeled. A desk with nothing on it except a lamp and a docking station. No personal items, no decoration. The specific impersonality of a space maintained entirely for function. Selene went directly to the shelving unit. She moved along it, scanning labels with a speed that said she had memorized what she was looking for. Her finger ran along the row of boxes and stopped. She pulled one down. She opened it on the desk. Inside, documents in plastic sleeves, organized by date. She moved through them quickly. Roman stood at the door watching the corridor outside and listening to the building. Here, she said. He looked back. She was holding a document in a plastic sleeve. Through the sleeve, he could see a contract header, a signature block, a corporate seal. Harrow Capital Advisors, she said. Meridian Group, 2009. Her voice was completely flat. His signature, notarized. She looked up. This is it. She looked at the document in her hands with the expression of someone who has been carrying the weight of a specific thing for 15 years and is holding the thing for the first time, and the expression lasted about 2 seconds before she put it away somewhere and became operational again. She reached into her coat for her phone. It rang before she touched it. The sound in the silent building was enormous. She silenced it in half a second. She looked at the screen. Roman watched her face change. Not gradually, all at once. The color went and the control went, and for one unguarded second she looked like what she was, which was a person who has just received information that collapses something that was load-bearing. "What?" he said. She turned the phone so he could see the screen. It was a text message. Unknown number, 4 words and a photograph. The 4 words were, "We have your contact." The photograph showed a woman in her late 60s seated in a chair in what appeared to be a bare room. The woman was alive and conscious and looking directly at the camera with an expression of controlled fear. Roman looked at Selene. Who is she? Selene's voice, when it came, was something he had not heard from her before. Not the controlled voice, not the managed voice, just a voice. Her name is Clara, Selene said. She's supposed to be dead. The phone buzzed again in her hand. A second message from the same unknown number. Bring the document to the stage. You have 10 minutes. Come alone. If Vesper follows you, she dies. If you call anyone, she dies. If you leave the building, she dies. Roman looked at the message, at the photograph, at Selene's face. She was already looking at him with the expression of someone who has done the calculation and arrived at an answer they cannot argue with, but Roman took the phone from her hand. He read the message twice, looked at the photograph, looked at the timestamp on the text. It had come in 40 seconds ago, which meant whoever sent it knew they were already inside the building, which meant the building had surveillance he and Selene hadn't found, which meant the schematic was good but not complete, and the margin between good but not complete and dead was the kind of margin that didn't forgive you for miscalculating it. She's alive, he said. She's supposed to be dead. Selene's voice had come back to something steadier, but it was a different kind of steady than before. Not controlled, just compressed, the way water is steady behind a dam. She had cancer. I was at her bedside. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I was there when she stopped breathing. People fake their deaths. She was 73 years old and she had stage 4. People fake their deaths, Roman said again, not harshly, just as a fact that needed to be in the room. Or someone faked it for her. Or she was moved before you arrived at the bedside and what you saw was... He watched Selene's face absorb this. It doesn't matter right now how. It matters that she's in this building and someone has her and we have 9 minutes. 8, Selene said. 8! He handed her phone back. The stage. What's the layout? She unfolded the schematic again. Her hands were not entirely steady. He watched her notice that and make them steady by force, and something in him registered that as the specific kind of courage that doesn't get named because it's too ordinary and too constant and too much a part of certain lives to be called anything except the way things are. Main stage, she said, her finger moving across the paper. Accessible from this level by the east stairwell or by the fly floor corridor that connects to the wings. Stage level is open. The seating was stripped when the building was vacated. The pit is still there, covered by boards, but the structural integrity of those boards after 12 years is, she paused, unknown. Sightlines from the stage. Clear to the back wall, the balconies are sealed, the lighting rig is still in place, but there's no power. She looked up. It's a box. Open floor, high ceiling, 2 wing entrances, 1 main door from the house. Whoever is down there controls every approach. Not every approach. Roman looked at the schematic. The fly system. The counterweight fly system is 60 feet above the stage deck. If the arbors are still loaded, are they? I don't know. Are they likely to be? She thought about it. A building that hasn't been used in 12 years with no maintenance budget and no active production. The arbors were probably left loaded when the building closed. It's the industry standard when you mothball a theater, you leave weight in the system. She looked at him. But 12 years of no maintenance on a counterweight fly system means the rope locks could be corroded, the purchase lines could be degraded, the arbors could be, Roman said, not are. She held his gaze. Not are. Then that's something. He looked at the schematic for 1 more second and memorized what he needed and handed it back to her. You go to the stage. I go up. Roman, you go to the stage because they asked for you, and if you don't appear, they'll know something is wrong. I go up because if I appear on the stage, they'll kill the woman immediately. He looked at her. You understand the geometry. She understood the geometry. He could see it in her face, the specific expression of someone who has done the calculation and arrived at an answer they don't want but can't dispute. "The document," she said. "Take it. If I give it to them, don't give it to them until you have to, and if you have to, give it to them." He looked at her steadily. "We can rebuild an evidence chain. We cannot rebuild a person." Something moved through her face. "You don't know her." "No, but you do." He held her gaze. "And you have been carrying the people you've lost for 15 years, and I am not going to let you add another one tonight if I can help it." The silence between them lasted 3 seconds. 7 minutes, she said. "Go." She went. Roman moved in the opposite direction along the second-level corridor, away from the administrative wing, toward the door that the schematic showed connecting to the fly floor access. He kept his phone light off. The corridor had enough ambient light from the street filtering through the building's sealed but not light-proof windows to navigate by. Barely. Enough to see the shapes of door frames and the edges of steps. He moved fast and quiet in the way he had learned to move in spaces where being heard meant being dead. The fly floor access was a metal door at the end of a short passage that had been padlocked, but the padlock had been cut. Recently, the metal edges still bright where the bolt cutter had gone through. Someone else had been up here. Roman filed that and went through. The fly floor was a narrow catwalk system, 60 feet above the stage deck, running the full width of the building behind the proscenium. The counterweight fly system occupied the stage right wall, an enormous vertical rack of pipe battens connected by rope to heavy steel arbors loaded with counterweights. The whole system designed to allow scenery and lighting to be flown in and out of the performance space by balancing the weight of the batten load against the counterweight load. In a functioning theater, it was a precise, responsive system. After 12 years of nothing, it was a question. He moved onto the catwalk carefully, testing each section before committing his weight, his hand on the iron railing that ran waist-high along the edge. Below him, through the gaps in the catwalk grating, he could see the stage deck 60 feet down, a vast dark rectangle that resolved slowly as his eyes adjusted, the boards underfoot, the shapes of a few pieces of abandoned equipment covered in drop cloths, the dark pit at the front covered with newer boards than the rest. He could see the main stage entrance from the house, the wide double doors at floor level that led from what had been the seating area. They were closed. He moved to the stage right fly rail and looked at the system. The arbors were loaded. He could see the dull gleam of the counterweight steel stacked in the channels. The purchase lines, which were the ropes used to move the arbors, hung in the rail in their coiled positions, and in the dim light he could see that some of them were in better shape than others. He tested the nearest one with his hand. Old, stiff, but not degraded. The rope lock above it, the device that held the batten in its flown position, was a heavy iron mechanism with a lever. And when he applied pressure to the lever, it resisted for a moment and then gave with a sound like something that had been asleep for a long time being woken. He locked it back, moved to the next one, and the next. He was identifying which battens were still functional when the main stage doors below him opened. He went still. 3 people came through the doors. 2 men, and, between them, a woman who moved the way people move when they are frightened but have decided that showing it completely would cost them something they're not willing to spend. She was older, compact, white-haired, and she walked with her chin level and her hands clasped in front of her, and she was clearly the woman from the photograph. Clara. Behind her, one of the men pressed his hand briefly between her shoulder blades to direct her. Not roughly, but with the firm impersonality of someone managing an asset rather than hurting a person, which was somehow worse. He wore tactical clothing, dark, and had the physical economy of someone who had done this work long enough for it to become structure rather than effort. The second man was older, heavier, and held a weapon with the casual comfort of someone for whom weapons were furniture. They positioned Clara in the center of the stage. She stood there in the dark, and the dust with her hand still clasped, and looked at the space around her with an expression that registered 12 years of vacancy and something else. Some recognition, Roman thought. Some knowledge of what this building was and had been. And then the main doors opened again and Selene walked in. The distance between them was 40 feet. Roman watched Selene cross it. She walked across the stage toward Clara with the measured step of someone who has made a specific decision about their posture and their pace and is executing that decision deliberately. And the two men tracked her with the automatic attention of their training. And when she reached Clara, she stopped and did not touch her immediately, just looked at her face. "Clara," she said. Clara looked at her. "Sarah." The name came out quietly, with the softness of old use. "We're going to be fine," Selene said. "I know," Clara said, and the steadiness of the old woman's voice was the kind of steadiness that came from having survived things that should have broken her and not having been broken. The heavier man stepped forward. "The document." Selene looked at him. "I want to know who you work for." "You know who I work for." "I want to hear it." "That's not how this—" "You want the document? You say the name." Selene's voice was flat and absolute. "Say the name." A pause. The man looked at her with the evaluating look of someone deciding whether the delay was worth the information it might extract. He decided it wasn't. "Wolf," he said. "Adrian Wolf." "Now the document." Selene reached into her coat. At the same moment, on the fly floor 60 feet above, Roman identified the baton he needed. A lighting pipe that from its position and the load on its arbor would, if released, come down fast and hard onto the stage-right position where the heavier man was standing, and closed his hand on the purchase line and waited. The timing was everything. Selene produced the document from her coat, the plastic sleeve, the contract, and held it out at arm's length without releasing it. "Wolf isn't here," she said. "No. He sent you to collect the document, and then—" She looked at the man with the weapon, at Clara. "And then what?" "That's not your—" "And then what?" she said again, the same flat, absolute register, the voice of someone who has already understood the answer and is asking it out loud for the purpose of making the other people in the room understand it too. The heavier man said nothing, which was its own answer. Clara made a small sound that was not fear, exactly. It was the sound of confirmation. A woman who had suspected something and had it confirmed without surprise. "Wolf doesn't leave loose ends," Selene said. She looked at Clara. "She was a loose end. I was a loose end. If I came here with the document, I was walking into—" "Give me the document," the man said. He stepped toward her. Roman released the purchase line. The baton came down like judgment, 60 feet of iron pipe dropping on its counterweight at speed, the arbor shooting upward as the pipe fell, the sound of it enormous in the enclosed space, a single percussive crash that hit the stage deck at the stage-right position and threw up a cloud of dust and splinters and the scattered debris of 12 years of abandonment. And the heavier man was not under it because he had moved one step forward toward Selene, one step that had saved him, and he spun toward the impact with his weapon coming up. Roman was already off the fly floor. He had found the rope ladder in the dark while he was working the fly rail, an old emergency egress, canvas and iron, bolted to the catwalk railing and dropping into the wing space, and he had gone over the railing and down it as the baton fell, moving on the rope with the ugly functional speed of a man who was not trained for this specifically, but had spent enough years in situations that required improvisation to understand that speed mattered more than technique. He hit the wing deck at the same moment the heavier man's weapon came level, and he was moving too fast to stop, so he didn't stop. He went across the wing deck and into the stage space and covered the distance between himself and the heavier man in 3 strides and drove his shoulder into the man's chest before the weapon could track to him, and they went down together onto the stage boards in a collision that had no grace in it at all. The weapon skidded. The other man, the tactical one, turned from Clara toward Roman, and Selene moved. She moved the way she had moved in the Valkyria State foyer, with the same compact efficiency, and she hit the tactical man's weapon arm at the elbow joint before he had completed his turn, and the weapon discharged into the stage deck between their feet with a sound that echoed up into the fly system and came back down as reverb. And she had his wrist, and she did something to his wrist that made a sound that didn't need to be described. And he went to one knee. The heavier man was trying to get up. Roman was on him, one knee on his chest, and the man was strong, genuinely strong, the kind of strong that came from regular professional maintenance. And he was getting up despite the knee on his chest because the leverage wasn't right, and Roman's left arm was taking the brunt of it wrong. And Roman reached back with his right hand and found the weapon that had skidded across the boards 2 seconds ago and pressed it to the man's jaw. Everything stopped. The heavier man looked up at him. "Don't," Roman said. The man went still. Across the stage, Selene had the tactical man on the ground with his arm bent wrong and her knee on his spine, and she was breathing hard, and Clara was standing exactly where she had been standing through all of it, her hands still clasped, her chin still level, watching with the expression of a woman who had spent decades not being surprised by what the world was capable of, and had found a way to make peace with that. The dust from the fallen baton was still settling in the air. The stage smelled of old wood and plaster and cordite from the discharged weapon, and the particular smell of physical effort, sweat, and heat, and the metallic edge of adrenaline. Roman looked across the stage at Selene. She was looking back at him. "You all right?" he said. "Yes." She looked down at the man under her knee. "This one is going to need a hospital. He can need whatever he wants later." Roman looked at the heavier man beneath him. "Where is Wolf?" The man said nothing. Roman pressed the weapon harder against his jaw. "I'm going to ask you once more, and then I'm going to have a much less productive conversation with you while you're much less comfortable. Where is Wolf?" "I don't—" "You know where he is. He sent you here. He has a communication protocol for when this job was done. Where does that communication go?" The man's jaw tightened. He was calculating. Roman could see it, the same calculation Roman himself would have made in the reversed position, weighing what Wolf would do to him for talking against what Roman Vesper was likely to do to him right now. "He has a location on the south side," the man said, "an industrial property, port access. He uses it for—" He stopped, breathed. "He uses it for departures. He's leaving the city. He had it prepared. After tonight, if things went, what's the address?" The man gave it. Roman filed it. He looked at Marcus's number in his phone and called it. Marcus picked up on the first ring. "I have an address," Roman said. "I need 4 men, and I need them quiet. No sirens, no notification, nothing that moves before I do." He gave the address. 20 minutes. If anyone moves on that property before I'm there, they answer to me for what they missed." "Copy," Marcus said. Roman ended the call. He stood up from the heavier man and looked at the stage around him. The fallen baton, the scattered debris, the 2 men on the ground, Clara in the center of it all. The dust still moving through the air and the dim light filtering down from the sealed roof windows. The shape of the old opera house around them, its destroyed grandeur, its 12 years of quiet. He looked at the name above the proscenium arch, carved into the plaster, still readable despite the years, the paint faded but the letters intact. Laurent. He looked at Selene. She was standing now, the tactical man zip-tied with his own equipment, her coat dusty and her hair coming loose from where it had been pulled back and a cut on her left forearm from something, the weapon discharge, the boards, he couldn't tell, that had bled down to her wrist and wasn't being attended to because she wasn't attending to it. She was looking up at the name above the arch. He walked across the stage to her. "Your arm," he said. "It's fine." "It's bleeding." "It's fine, Roman." She kept looking at the arch. He followed her gaze. The carved letters. The name that had been on this building for 80 years and that had belonged, for 40 of them, to people who were no longer alive to claim it. Clara moved to Selene's side. The old woman put her hand on Selene's arm, the uninjured one, and held it, and Selene covered the old woman's hand with her own without looking away from the proscenium. "You're supposed to be dead," Selene said quietly. "I know," Clara said. "I'm sorry. They moved me before—" Her voice was steady but old, the voice of someone for whom steadiness had become a physical habit. "They told me if I disappeared, if you believed I was gone, it would buy us both more time, that you'd stop looking for a connection and they'd stop looking for you." "Who told you that?" A pause. "Moretti," Clara said. "Vincent Moretti. He has protected me for 4 years. He knew where you were. He knew what you were doing. He let it continue because he believed—" She stopped. "He said he owed your father a debt he could never repay. He said this was as close as he could come." Selene was very still. Roman watched her process this. The specific difficulty of receiving information that recontextualizes something you had decided about a person. The way it required you to dismantle and rebuild and decide whether the rebuilt version held. "He recognized me tonight," she said slowly. "At the gala. He recognized the necklace." "Yes," Clara said. "He called me afterward. He told me things had accelerated, that you were visible and that Wolf had likely identified you, and that the protocol had to change. She looked at her own hands. He sent men to bring me here. He said this building was the end of it, one way or another. He knew about Wolf's documents, Roman said. He has known for years, Clara said. He has not had the means to reach them. He has not had... She looked at Selene. He has not had you. The opera house was quiet. Somewhere in the building's upper levels, something shifted. Old wood settling, the building adjusting to the temperature differential of bodies in a space that had held no bodies for years. The sound moved through the walls like something remembering itself. Roman looked at the document still in Selene's hand, the plastic sleeve, the contract. Wolf's location will be valid for maybe another hour, he said. He'll have a check-in protocol. When his men don't check in, he moves, Selene said. Yes. She looked at the document, at Clara, at Roman. Clara can't be here when... I know. He looked at the old woman. There's a car 2 blocks east. The driver is mine. He'll take you somewhere Wolf's people can't reach. Clara looked at him with the evaluating gaze of someone who had spent decades assessing which men in difficult situations could be trusted and which couldn't, and who had developed a reliable instinct for the difference. You're Roman Vesper, she said. Yes. She looked at Selene. He's been exactly who you expected him to be, Clara said quietly, and considerably better in some ways. Selene's expression moved briefly into something unguarded and was gone. Go, she said. Please. Clara squeezed her arm once. She looked at Roman for one more moment with that evaluating gaze, and then she nodded, a single nod that contained something more than acknowledgement, and she walked toward the stage door with the straight-backed posture of an old woman who had survived things that should have broken her and had chosen, each time, not to be broken. Roman watched her go. He turned to Selene. The cut. Later. Now. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded cloth, a pocket square, white, the kind of thing he carried because the events he attended required it, and which had never before been used for its nominal purpose. He took her arm and she let him, and he pressed the cloth against the cut and held it with enough pressure to count. She looked at his hands, then at his face. You're going after Wolf. We're going after Wolf. He's going to have more men than 2. I know. Marcus's 4 men are a start. She was quiet for a moment, his hand on her arm, the cloth against the cut. He's going to use the frame, she said. The transfer record. Even if we get the contract to the right people, Wolf is going to... I have a federal contact I've been building for 8 months, Roman said. I told Moretti I had leverage. I do. I have a contact who wants Wolf more than they want me, and they have been patient about it because they understand that patience is how you get the real thing instead of the expedient thing. He looked at her. The contract plus the transfer record plus what we can get from Carver, that's not circumstantial. That's a case. Getting Carver. Marcus has him contained. She blinked. Since when? Since 40 minutes ago. The phone signal was real. I sent 2 men and Marcus followed. He held her gaze. I knew if Carver was running, he'd run to a Wolf location. I needed him to lead us to one. He led us to the port property before they could get him inside. She looked at him. You were 2 steps ahead, she said. I was 1 step behind you for 14 months, he said. I needed to catch up somewhere. She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted into territory that neither of them had words prepared for, and then she looked away at the name above the arch and breathed once and looked back at him. The port property, she said. How do we play it? Wolf will have 2 or 3 men. He travels light for departures. He's done this before. There's a pattern. He keeps the footprint small because small footprints move fast. Roman released her arm. The bleeding had slowed. We go in before Marcus's 4 men. We go in first because if Wolf sees a large force, he has a protocol. He burns everything, Selene said. He burns everything. So we go in as 2. We go in as 2 and we create a situation that locks him before he can execute the protocol. Roman looked at the exit. The car is still outside. The car is still outside. She looked at the document in her hand, the plastic sleeve, the contract, the signature. 15 years of weight in a single sheet of paper. She folded it carefully and placed it in her coat's interior pocket, against her chest where she could feel it. Roman, she said. What? She looked at him with the same direct gaze she had used on the balcony at the Valkyrie estate, when the rain was falling and the city was spread below them, and she had said 3 words that had changed everything. "After this is over," she said, "whatever comes after, I need you to understand that I didn't come into your organization to end up here." She held his gaze. "I came in with one purpose. Everything else—" She stopped. "Everything else wasn't part of the plan." He looked at her, at the cut on her arm and the dust on her coat, and the loosened hair and the eyes that had watched everything for 14 months and were watching him now with the specific attention of a woman who had learned not to say things she didn't mean because she had been in situations where every word cost something. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway. I know that too." They walked off the stage together, out of the opera house, and back into the wet Chicago night, and the building stood behind them with its old name on the arch and its 12 years of silence, and the rain had stopped, and the city was already moving toward whatever it was going to do next, indifferent and continuous and alive, and ahead of them at a port property on the south side. Adrian Wolfe was waiting beside a car with his protocol in his hand and his 4-hour window closing, and no idea that the 2 people walking toward him through the dark had already. The port property was a converted warehouse 3 blocks from the lakefront, the kind of building that had been industrial in one century and repurposed in another, and was now neither thing cleanly, too modified to be functional as a warehouse, too utilitarian to be anything else. A single loading dock on the south face, 3 ground-level windows painted over from the inside, a chain-link perimeter with a vehicle gate that was standing open, which meant someone had come through recently and not bothered to close it behind them, which meant they were not planning to stay. Roman stopped the car a block north and killed the lights. The clock on the dash read 1:47 a.m. He looked at the building. One visible light source, a ground-floor window on the east face, where the paint had cracked and a thin line of yellow light showed through. One vehicle in the lot, a dark SUV with its engine running, exhaust vapor rising in the cold air. The driver's side door was closed. Someone was in it, or it had been left running for a fast exit, and either way it meant the window was narrowing. "Carver," Selene said. "Marcus has him at a location 2 miles north." Roman had confirmed it on the drive over. Carver in a room with 2 of Marcus's men, not talking yet, but present, contained. The specific containment of someone who understood that the options available to him had reduced to a very small number. He'll talk. They always talk when they understand the math. The math being, whatever Wolfe paid him in 2009 is worth considerably less than what I can offer him now for the full account. He looked at her, and considerably more than what happens to him if he doesn't take the offer. She looked at the building. Wolfe has people inside. 2, I think, maybe 3. He had run the math on the drive, Wolfe's pattern, his history of small footprints for departures, the vehicle in the lot, the light in the window. He'll have someone managing the logistics, and at least one man watching the exits. He won't be alone because he's never alone, but he travels lean when he runs because lean is fast, and Wolfe understands that speed is the variable he can control when everything else has gone sideways. "He thinks everything else has gone sideways in his favor," Selene said. "Yes, his men haven't checked in, but he'll attribute that to the document being retrieved and the protocol being executed. He'll be in a window of confidence right now. Everything he planned tonight worked, or he believes it did, and he's managing his exit with the satisfaction of a man who has been 2 steps ahead for 15 years. And Marcus's 4 men, staged 1 block south. They do not move until I signal them. If they move early, Wolfe executes the burn protocol," Selene said, "destroys whatever's inside and runs. So we go in quiet and we lock the exit before he knows the geometry has changed." She was already looking at the vehicle gate, at the angle of the lot, at the shadow line along the east face of the building where the light from the cracked window didn't reach. "The dock entrance," she said. "It opens inward. The hinges are on the outside face, which means it's an older installation that wasn't built for security. If the locking bar is set, it can be moved from the outside by someone who knows the mechanism." He looked at her. "I did the research," she said simply. "Of course you did." They moved. The temperature had dropped while they were inside the opera house. Proper cold now, the lake pushing it in off the water. The kind of cold that made surfaces slick and breath visible, and the simple act of moving quietly harder because cold air carried sound differently than warm air. Roman moved along the shadow line of the fence toward the vehicle gate, and Selene moved parallel to him, slightly wider, keeping the SUV in her sightline. The SUV's driver window came down. Both of them went still. A man's arm extended from the window. He was lighting a cigarette. The brief orange light of the lighter illuminated the lower half of a face, male, 40s, the jaw of someone who spent time at it. He drew on the cigarette and the window went back up. Roman and Selene resumed moving. The dock entrance was on the building's south face, set back 6 feet from the main wall under a shallow overhang. Roman reached it first and ran his hand along the door's edge in the dark until he found the hinges. External, as Selene had said, 3 of them, the old kind with exposed pin mechanisms. He looked back at her. She was already at his shoulder with something in her hand that he identified in the dark as a multi-tool. She worked the top hinge pin in 30 seconds, the second in 45. The third was corroded and took longer, and the sound it made when it finally moved was a sound that carried, and both of them went completely still and listened. Nothing from inside. Nothing from the SUV. Roman gripped the door's edge and pulled it outward on the hinge side, the bar on the lock side holding but the door flexing enough on the freed hinges to create a gap wide enough for a person, barely. And he went through sideways and she followed him and they were inside. The warehouse interior was large and dim, the yellow light coming from a portable work lamp set on the floor near the far wall. In the lamp's cast, they could see the space had been prepared for departure. 2 hard-sided cases open on a folding table, documents and drives and physical media being sorted and loaded, the specific curation of a man deciding in real time what was worth taking and what had to be left. A metal wastebasket beside the table had ash in it and the remains of burned paper, still faintly orange at the edges. He was burning things. Not everything. The cases suggested selectivity, but burning the things that connected the network to him directly and taking the things that would let him rebuild somewhere else. Wolf himself was standing at the table. Roman saw him clearly for the first time without the managed distance of public life between them. Not the councilman in the photograph, not the reformer on the news segment, but the actual man. And the actual man was 61 and lean and had the kind of face that had learned to perform openness so consistently that the performance had become the face, and he was wearing a dark coat over a dress shirt and he was working with the calm efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this. One man stood near the east wall with a weapon. Another was near the door to what appeared to be a side office, arms folded, watching the room. Roman stepped into the light. Wolf looked up. The fraction of a second in which a person's face shows what they actually feel before they can manage it is the most honest moment in any exchange. And in that fraction, Roman saw recognition, calculation, and the specific fear of a man who had believed himself safe discovering he was not. All of it moving through Wolf's expression and being replaced very quickly by the managed version. "Roman Vesper," Wolf said. His voice was almost steady. "I know," Roman said. "You weren't expecting me." The man near the east wall had his weapon half raised, the uncertain angle of someone waiting for a signal from the man who was paying him. Wolf looked past Roman's shoulder. Selene stepped out of the dark behind Roman and came to stand beside him, and Wolf looked at her with the specific look of a man revising his situation assessment in real time, and the revision was not going in a direction he liked. "The document retrieval," Wolf said carefully. "My men are having a difficult night," Roman said. Wolf looked at the weapon on his table. Roman watched him look at it and watched him calculate the distance and the geometry and arrive at the conclusion that Roman had already arrived at, which was that the distance was wrong and the geometry was wrong, and the weapon on the table was not a real option. "Whatever you think you have," Wolf said. "You should understand that the transfer record alone—" "We have the contract," Selene said. The room was quiet. Wolf looked at her. Something happened in his face that was not the managed version, something that went deeper than management, something that understood what the contract meant in the hands of the people standing in front of him, and what it meant for the architecture of 15 years of careful construction. "Harrow Capital Advisors," she said. "Meridian Group, your signature." Notarized. She reached into her coat and produced the plastic sleeve and held it so the light from the work lamp caught it. "The physical original, which you kept because you trusted your security and because men who have been safe for long enough start to trust the permanence of it." Wolf looked at the document. He looked at Selene's face. You were 9 years old, he said. Yes. Your mother... Don't, she said, the single word with enough weight in it to stop him completely. He stopped. I'm going to tell you what happens now, Roman said. And you're going to listen without the version of yourself you show to cameras, because that version isn't useful in this room. He moved 2 steps closer to the table. The man near the east wall tracked him. Roman didn't look at the man. You have 2 men here and a driver outside who is currently finishing a cigarette and who is going to finish it and sit in the car for another 9 minutes before he decides to come in and check on the schedule. In 9 minutes, 4 of my men come through every entrance of this building. The driver in the lot has already been identified. He goes nowhere. He held Wolf's gaze. The transfer record you put in my account tonight is documented with the original transaction data, photographed, and in the possession of a federal contact who has been building a case against your network for 22 months. The contract in that sleeve is the missing piece that makes everything else not circumstantial. He stopped. There is no version of this where you leave this building with options you don't have right now. Wolf looked at him. Roman Vesper coming to me with a federal contact, he said. That's an interesting play. It's not a play. A man with your record aligning himself with, my record is mine, Roman said. What's on your record is also yours. The difference is that my record doesn't include the murder of a family with children in it. The word murder in the open air of the room. Not euphemism, not framed, just the word. Wolf's jaw tightened. You have no idea, he said, and the managed voice had something underneath it now, something older and more genuine. What the Laurent organization was building toward, what your father... He stopped, looked at Selene. What Dominic was going to do with the port access and the infrastructure contracts if he'd been allowed to consolidate. He was going to build a business, Selene said. That's what he told you when he turned you down. He was going to build something legitimate, something that didn't require men like you. Her voice was flat and factual and completely devastating. He was 44 years old, and he had decided to get out, and he told you that when he refused your proposal, and you killed him for it because a man getting out of the life you'd built your power on was a threat to the story you'd been telling everyone about who you were. Wolf looked at her for a long moment. I made a decision, he said. Yes, she said. You did. I made a decision that protected... It protected you, she said. That's all it protected. That's all it was ever about. She held the plastic sleeve steady in the lamplight. My mother, my brother. The 3 people on the staff who had families of their own. You made a decision that killed 7 people, and you've been managing the story of that decision for 15 years, and tonight the story ends. The man near the east wall moved. He didn't move toward Roman. He moved toward the side office door, and the movement was the specific movement of someone who has decided that the situation has changed enough to reassess their own position in it. Not a lunge toward confrontation, but a step toward an exit, the calculation of a hired man who understands that what he's being paid for and what is currently happening in this room are 2 different things. Roman's weapon came out. Don't, he said. The man stopped, looked at Roman, looked at the weapon, put his hands away from his body. Wolf watched this with the expression of someone watching a structure he built demonstrate its limits. The second man, near the folding door, unfolded his arms slowly and held them out to his sides. He said nothing. He had done a calculation of his own. Wolf looked at the cases on the table, the documents being sorted, the ash in the wastebasket, the architecture of a departure that was no longer a departure. The federal contact, he said. What are the terms? That's not a conversation you have with me, Roman said. That's a conversation you have with them. And you get, the transfer record is reversed and documented as fraudulent. My account is clean. Roman looked at him. That's the agreement. Everything else is between you and them. Wolf looked at Selene. And you, he said, what do you get? She held his gaze. I get to watch you lose everything you built on top of what you took. She lowered the document to her side. That's what I came for. 15 years ago, I was a 9-year-old girl in a house in Oak Park with a fever, and my family was alive. Then they weren't. I get to be in the room when the account comes due. She paused. That's what I get. Wolf looked at her for a long time. The managed face had fallen away entirely now, not replaced by remorse. Nothing that clean, but by something that was the accurate face of a man who has operated without consequence for so long that consequence has become theoretical, and is now discovering that theoretical things have weight. He sat down in the chair behind the table. It was not a gesture of defeat, not theatrical. It was a man who was tired, a specific ancient tiredness that had been accumulating for a long time and had finally found the moment to show itself. Roman signaled through the dock door gap with 2 short flashes of his phone light. Outside, a car door opened. Then another. Marcus came through the dock entrance first. Then 3 more men through the main entrance on the east face. And the warehouse was suddenly full of people, and the departure logistics on the table meant nothing. And the 2 men Wolf had brought folded their postures into the cooperative positions of people who have decided that cooperation is the most practical option available. Marcus looked at Roman. Carver's talking, he said. Already. Started 20 minutes ago. Full account. The Meridian Group contract, the 2009 payment, the placement inside your organization. Marcus held his gaze. He wants the offer. He gets the reduced version, Roman said, after he's given everything. Marcus nodded. Roman looked at Wolf. There's a man coming in 20 minutes who I've been talking to for 8 months. His name is not something I'm going to tell you. He's going to read you your options. I suggest you listen to him the way you just listened to me, because he's less patient and he has considerably more paper. He looked at the cases on the table. Don't touch those. They're evidence now. Wolf looked at his hands, the tired face, the real face. Roman turned away from him. Selene was standing near the dock entrance, the document still in her hand, the lamplight finding the silver of her dress beneath the open coat, the cut on her arm bandaged now with the pocket square from earlier, the makeshift white of it against her wrist. She was looking at the warehouse floor, the concrete, the stains of old machinery, the particular ugliness of a functional space that had never been meant to hold anything important. Roman walked to her. She looked up. He looked at her face in the warehouse light, which was honest the way bad light is honest. It didn't refine anything, just showed what was there. The exhaustion, the cut, the 14 months of careful watching, and the 15 years before that of carrying something that should have been put down a long time ago, but that she had carried because there was no one else to carry it. It's done, he said. She looked at the document in her hand, the plastic sleeve, the contract that had been the fixed point around which 3 years of work had orbited. Almost, she said. She walked to Marcus and placed the document in his hands and told him who it was going to and the specific chain of custody it needed to follow to be admissible. And Marcus listened with the focused attention of a man who understood that he was being given instructions that mattered. And when she had finished, he nodded and said nothing and handled the document carefully. Selene came back to Roman. They walked out of the warehouse together into the cold air and the dark of the port district, the lake somewhere close, its presence and the smell of the air and the temperature of it and the low sound of it moving against the breakwater 2 blocks away. The city above them doing what the city always did, indifferent and lit and continuous. Roman's phone rang. He looked at the screen. The federal contact. He answered it and spoke for 4 minutes in the flat, factual voice of someone delivering information rather than narrating it, and confirmed the location and the evidence chain and the presence of Wolf and the terms they had established over 8 months of careful, patient conversation. The voice on the other end was professional and brief. It said, 25 minutes. He ended the call. Selene was sitting on the low concrete barrier at the edge of the lot, looking at the lake she couldn't quite see. He sat beside her. Not close enough to be deliberate, not far enough to be considered, just beside her. 25 minutes, he said. I heard. They sat in the cold and the quiet. Clara, she said. Marcus put her in a hotel under a clean name. She's safe. He paused. She'll need to give a statement at some point. About her identity. About the 4 years. Moretti will have to answer for his role in concealing her. He protected her. He also concealed a material witness for 4 years. Selene was quiet for a moment. He owed my father a debt, she said. He paid it in the only way he knew how to. It wasn't clean. It wasn't legal. She breathed out slowly into the cold air, the breath visible for a moment and then gone. But she's alive. Yes. That counts for something. Yes, he said. It does. The lake was out there in the dark. The sound of it low and constant. The sound that Chicago had been built beside and that had been there before the city and would be there after it, indifferent to all of it. My father wanted to get out, Selene said. She said it quietly, not to Roman specifically, not to the dark or the lake. Just said it into the air the way you say things that have been held for a long time and need to be said somewhere. He was 44. He'd spent 20 years building something, and he'd decided that what he'd built wasn't what he wanted to leave behind. He told Wolf no because he was already in the process of making the whole thing legitimate. Quietly, without announcement. He was 2 years into it. She paused. He would have made it. I believe that. I've believed it for 15 years because the alternative, that he would have stayed in it, that what happened was inevitable rather than stolen. The alternative was something I couldn't carry. Roman said nothing. He never told me any of it, she said. I was 9. I knew my father was a man who had serious friends and serious problems, and who came home every night for dinner and called me by a name no one else used and made me feel, despite all of it, completely safe. She looked at her hands in her lap. That's the specific cruelty of it. He made me feel safe. He was in the process of building something real. And then Wolf decided that a man trying to walk away was more threatening than a man staying in, and that was the end of it. He was right to try, Roman said. She looked at him. Getting out, Roman said. He looked at the dark where the lake was. It's the right thing to want. She looked at his face, the profile of it in the dark, the specific quality of that sentence, which was not abstract. Are you? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know what I am right now, he said. 4 hours ago, I was a man with an organization and a structure and a set of assumptions about what that structure contained. Now I know that one of the people I trusted most inside it was placed there specifically to frame me for the worst thing that happened in the city in 15 years. He paused. That changes the inventory. It changes the inventory, she repeated with a small inflection that wasn't quite irony and wasn't quite not. The organization isn't the problem, he said. Organizations are structures. Structures are only as good as what you build them for. He looked at her. What I've been building it for is something I'm going to have to look at differently now. She held his gaze. Because of tonight. Because of tonight, he said. And because of 14 months of watching someone operate inside my world with a clarity about what it was that I had stopped letting myself have. She was quiet for a moment. The lake sound, the cold air, the 25-minute window closing slowly toward whatever it was going to open into. I didn't come into your organization to change it, she said. I know. I didn't come in to change you. I know that too. I came in with one purpose, and that purpose is in Marcus's hands right now, on its way to becoming a federal case and everything else. She stopped, breathed once. Everything else was not in the plan. You keep saying that, he said, because it keeps being true. He looked at her. The lamplight from the warehouse still leaking through the dock entrance behind them, the faintest edge of it finding the silver of her dress, the line of her throat, the necklace that was back in her coat pocket now, because she had put it there before they left the opera house, and he had not asked her about it, and she had not explained it. The necklace, he said. She reached into her pocket and took it out and held it in her palm. The sapphires dark in the poor light. The antique setting catching nothing but still somehow present, still somehow significant. My mother wore it the last time I saw her, she said, the night before I went to Clara's. She was standing in the hallway of our house, putting it on before a dinner my father was hosting, and I came down the stairs in my pajamas because I couldn't sleep. And she looked up and saw me and came to the bottom of the stairs, and she took it off, and she put it around my neck, and she said it looked like it belonged there. She closed her hand around it. She took it back when she put me to bed, but she said it. A pause. It looked like it belonged there. Itim mantas. Roman looked at her closed hand. He reached over slowly. She opened her hand. He took the necklace. She turned slightly on the concrete barrier, and he reached around and clasped it at the back of her neck, his fingers on the old clasp in the cold air. And when it was fastened, he drew his hands back, and she touched the sapphires at her throat with 2 fingers and did not say anything. They sat in the silence of something that had been going on for 15 years being over. In the warehouse behind them, Adrian Wolfe sat in a folding chair beside two hard-sided cases that contained the carefully curated remainder of a life built on other people's silence, and waited for the men who were coming. He sat with the specific posture of a man who has finally run out of next moves, and the tiredness in him was real now, the genuine tiredness underneath all the managed versions, and he put his hands flat on his knees and looked at the warehouse floor and did not speak. Daniel Carver, 2 miles north in a room with bare walls, and two of Marcus's men had been talking for 40 minutes. He talked the way men talk when they understand that the talking is the last thing they have to offer. Carefully at first, then with increasing speed, the information coming out of him in the particular order of someone who has been holding it for 11 years and finds, once they start, that the holding was the hard part and the releasing is almost easy. Names, dates, account numbers, the specific operational details of a contract executed on a specific night in 2009 that had involved 4 men, of whom he was one, and which he had filed under the part of himself that didn't come out in the daylight. He talked until there was nothing left to say. 22 minutes after Roman's call, 3 vehicles arrived at the port property. The men who came out of them wore no uniforms. They carried identification that they showed to Marcus, and Marcus stepped back and let them through, and they went into the warehouse, and the next hour was a procedural thing conducted in the flat professional language of people with warrants and evidence protocols. And Adrian Wolfe answered their questions in the voice of the managed version of himself, because the managed version was the only thing he had left. Roman and Selene stayed outside. At 3:15 a.m., a man in a gray overcoat came out of the warehouse and walked to Roman, and they spoke for 7 minutes. The man in the gray overcoat did not look surprised by anything Roman told him, which was consistent with 8 months of conversation. He looked at Selene once, acknowledged her with a nod that was professional rather than personal, and said that the transfer record would be addressed and that the documentation chain was sufficient for what was needed and that Roman's cooperation would be noted. Roman said he didn't need it noted. The man in the gray overcoat said it would be noted anyway, and went back inside. Selene looked at Roman. "Noted anyway," she said. "He's thorough," Roman said. "It's why I picked him." She almost smiled. Not quite, but the territory near a smile. Marcus came out at 3:40 and stood beside Roman, and they had the conversation that longtime associates have after something conclusive, which was not long and not sentimental, but had the specific quality of two people acknowledging that a significant thing had happened and that the landscape was going to look different going forward. "Carver," Roman said. "Cooperating fully," Marcus said. "The federal people will make their own arrangement with him. We're out of that process. The South Side operation. Needs a new logistics manager. Yes? I have a name. Give me the name tomorrow." Roman looked at the warehouse. "Tonight is not a business conversation." Marcus looked at Selene, something in his face that was not quite apology and was not quite acknowledgement, but lived somewhere between them. "The background check," he said, "was thorough," she said. "It was meant to be." "It was the best work I've seen," he said. "Factual. The Cincinnati documentation alone." "Thank you," she said, and she said it simply, the way you accept a professional compliment from a professional, and Marcus nodded once and went back to the work of the night. Selene and Roman walked to the car at 4 a.m. The city was at its quietest, that specific window between 2 and 5 when even Chicago ran low, when the all-night pharmacies were empty and the buses ran on the skeleton schedule and the streets had the quality of something resting. He drove north. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and the necklace at her throat and the coat buttoned against the cold, and she looked out the window at the city moving past. "Where are you actually living?" he said. "Wicker Park. A 2-bedroom on Damon." She paused. "Selene Vale's apartment. Documented lease, documented history. And Serafina Laurent." She was quiet for a moment. "Serafina Laurent hasn't had an address in 15 years. He drove. "She could have one," he said. The sentence was quiet and did not explain itself and did not need to. Selene looked out the window. At the streetlights and the closed storefronts and the occasional person on a corner living the nighttime life of the city and the lake somewhere east of them always, the permanent dark water of it. "That would depend," she said. "On what?" "On what the address meant." She turned to look at his profile. "I didn't come into your world to stay in it. I know. I'm not. She stopped. What you do, Roman? What you've built? I didn't spend 15 years working toward this moment so that I could step directly into another version of the thing that killed my family. No, he said, you didn't. So the question, he said, is not whether you stay in my world. The question is whether my world is the same world it was yesterday. He looked at the road. It isn't. It isn't going to be. Some of that is practical. Carver's testimony, the federal relationship, the parts of the operation that are going to have to be restructured. Some of it is, he paused, some of it is that I have spent 11 years running something that was being used against me without my knowledge. And the part of me that built it on specific principles is not interested in running something that can be used that way again. She watched his face. That's a long road, she said. Yes. A lot of it isn't clean. No. You're not a man who becomes something different overnight. I know what I am, he said. I'm not asking you to believe in a version of me that doesn't exist yet. He glanced at her. I'm asking you to consider that the version that might exist is worth the time it takes to find out. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the city continued. A traffic light changed from red to green for no one. A delivery truck turned a corner 2 blocks ahead, the lake smell coming in from the east, permanent and cold and there. I'm going to need a new identity, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Selene Vale is going to be complicated to maintain after tonight, she said. Too many people saw her. The federal process will expose the backstory. I'll need documentation that's... She paused. I'll need a name. What name do you want? She thought about it. The city moved past. The early morning light was beginning somewhere far to the east, not visible yet, but present in the quality of the dark, that subtle shift that happened before the horizon committed to it. Laurent, she said. He looked at her. My father wanted to make it legitimate, she said. He wanted to build something with his name on it that he wasn't ashamed of. He didn't get to. She touched the necklace at her throat. The name is still there on the opera house, on the deed, in the city's records. She looked straight ahead. I'd like to use it. Roman was quiet for a moment. Then use it, he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the road. The specific profile of a man who has come through something conclusive and is still in the process of understanding what he's arrived at on the other side. Serafina Laurent, she said. Sounds very formal. Sera, he said. She looked at him. That's what Clara called you, he said. In the theater. She was quiet for a moment. You noticed that, she said. I notice things, he said. I just waited 14 months to use most of them. This time she did smile. Small, real. The specific smile of a person who has been careful for a very long time and is trying out the unfamiliar weight of something lighter. He drove north through the quiet city, and she sat beside him in the passenger seat with her hand resting on the center console between them. And after a moment his hand moved and covered hers, and neither of them said anything about it because there was nothing that needed to be said. The sun came up over Lake Michigan at 5:53 a.m. and found Chicago the way the sun always found it, indifferent to what had happened in the dark, interested only in the fact of the new day, the water catching the light and throwing it back in pieces, the skyline holding its shape against the brightening sky. In a federal processing facility on the west side, Adrian Wolfe sat across a table from people who had been waiting a long time for exactly this conversation. And the managed version of himself that he'd worn for 40 years sat beside him like a coat he'd forgotten how to take off. And the people across the table were patient because they could afford to be patient now, and the morning was very long. In a hotel room under a name she'd been given by a man who owed a dead friend a debt, Clara sat in a chair by the window and watched the light come up over the city she'd spent 4 years hiding from, and held a cup of coffee that had gone cold because she'd been watching the light for a long time, and she felt something in her chest that was old and tired and also, quietly, like it had been waiting a long time to be set down. In the offices of a federal case that had been building for 22 months, a document in a plastic sleeve was logged into evidence under a chain of custody that 2 lawyers and an archivist would later describe as exceptionally clean. And the case number that had existed as a container waiting for its contents finally had everything it needed, and the people who had built it went home and slept. And in a city that had been running on a specific set of lies for 15 years, the lies stopped. Not dramatically. Not with announcement. The way lies stop when the structure beneath them has been removed. Gradually, then all at once, the whole weight of it finding the floor. 3 weeks later, a man named Roman Vesper sat across a desk from a lawyer who specialized in the restructuring of businesses with complicated histories. And the conversation was long and specific and occasionally uncomfortable, and at the end of it, he signed documents that began a process that would take years to complete and that no one who knew him would have entirely believed he was capable of beginning. And beside him, reviewing the same documents with the careful attention of someone who had spent years learning to read the specific language of institutional deception and had become very good at recognizing it in all its forms, sat a woman whose name, her real name, the name on the deed of an opera house on the south side, that she had begun the process of reclaiming through the appropriate legal channels, was Serafina Laurent. She found 2 problems in the documents. She told the lawyer. The lawyer corrected them. Roman looked at her. "You're going to be extremely inconvenient," he said. "Yes," she said. She turned the page. That was always the plan. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did. The lake was doing what the lake did. The city ran on its complexity and its appetite and its deep, layered history of people who had built things in the dark and people who had built things in the light, and the line between those things was the city itself, and always had been. The window of the lawyer's office looked east toward the water. Sarah looked at it for a moment, at the light on the lake, at the city her father had wanted to leave something good behind in. She turned back to the documents. There was work to do.